He was not born, he was carved. In Sparta, sons of kings did not arrive as gifts, but emerged as burdens to be tested. The midwife did not smile when he cried. She inspected his limbs for softness, for flaw. There was a tremble in his leg. A tremble was death. But his father, the reigning king, did not blink. "If he dies, he said, turning from the blood-stained floor. The infant did not die. He stopped trembling. That was the beginning. His name was Lysandros, but he would forget that name many times. It would be stripped from him like flesh in the agoge. At 7, his mother wept silently, while braiding his hair one last time. She handed him to the instructors, like one might hand over meat to a butcher. "He is yours," she said, voice flat. And then she left. He did not call after her. He had already been told not to. The other boys were all like him, shivering, small, silent. The instructors wasted no time. Day 1, they stripped them bare, beat them for shivering, starved them for discipline, and shoved them into cold stone halls where rats were louder than breathing. "This is where kings are made," they said. And Lysandros believed them. Belief was all he had. Food came in handfuls, sometimes not at all. One night, he stole from another boy older, bigger. He was caught. The punishment was not for stealing. It was for getting caught. They whipped his back until it bled, then made him sleep outside, naked in the frost. He did not cry. That earned respect. Respect came like bones cracked and hidden under flesh. When he turned 9, he watched a boy die from infection. No one mourned. They dragged the body out at dawn. The instructor stepped over the blood as if it were spilled wine. "He was weak," he said. Lysandros nodded. He whispered a goodbye in the dark when no one was looking. At 11, they made him fight. Not practice. Fight. One-on-one. Winner eats. Loser doesn't. He learned where to hit, when to wait, how to bite without shame. He lost 3 teeth that year. One lodged in another boy's cheek. No one helped. That was the point. You win, or you vanish. He did not vanish. At 13, the night inspections began. Instructors crept through the halls, checking for movement, sound, dreams. If you dreamed aloud, you were beaten. If you woke startled, you were starved. If you spoke your mother's name, you were shamed before all. He learned to sleep like stone still, soundless, cold. One night, he found a snake in his blanket. He did not flinch. It slid across his chest. He whispered to it. "Called it, brother." It left. The next day, a boy lost his eye to that same snake. Lysandros said nothing. Saying something was weakness. At 15, they sent him into the wild. No food, no cloak, no name. "Return or die," they said. He returned after 9 days, carrying the pelt of a wolf he killed with a sharpened stick. His eyes were sunken, his legs shaking. But he returned. That night, they gave him bread. Real bread, he cried for the first time in years. Quietly, into the bread. No one saw. At 16, he saw his first helot execution. A man accused of speaking too loudly. Lysandros was told to slit the throat. He hesitated. Just a breath. Enough. The instructor raised a brow. "Do you question the law?" Lysandros shook his head and finished the task. Blood soaked his hands. That night, he washed them until they bled. Not from guilt, from memory. Blood clings harder than sin. He dreamt of that man for a week. Then never again. At 17, they tested him in another way. A woman was sent to him. Older, cold-eyed. She said nothing, just lay beside him and waited. He did not understand. He did not move. She left before dawn. He was punished. "A king must know the body as he knows the sword," they said. He trained harder, bled more, slept less. At 18, he was made to command. 10 boys, younger than him. One defied him. Lysandros broke his arm. Another wept. Lysandros cut his hair and burned it. Leadership, they said, is cruelty with purpose. He nodded. He had learned that truth early. He applied it now. No more hesitation. At 19, he was called to the council. His father was dead, poisoned, whispered rumors. No proof, just silence. The kind of silence that hangs heavy. The kind that tastes like betrayal. Lysandros was king now. He stood before the ephors. They looked through him. One said, "Are you ready?" He did not answer. He knelt, took the spear, swore the oath. His voice cracked, just a little. No one mentioned it. They saw the scars on his back, the calluses on his hands, the hollowness behind his eyes. "He is ready," one said. The others nodded. That night, he slept in a room alone for the first time in his life. No rats, no whispers, no punishment, just silence. He did not sleep. He lay there, eyes open, waiting for the pain. It never came, and that scared him more than anything. Because without pain, what was he? Without pain, what did he become? The answer would come, slowly, with blow, odd, with war, with decisions that would haunt history. But for now, he lay there, still, silent, cold, as he had been taught. He wore the cloak, but it did not warm him. He sat on the throne, but it did not hold him. The throne room was carved from shadow. The marble felt cold, even in summer. Every sound echoed, footsteps, whispers, the twitch of leather. It was not a place for comfort. It was a place for command. And yet Lysandros felt neither comfort nor command. The ephors stood in silence, old men with eyes like worn coins, watching, weighing, waiting. He had thought kings ruled. He was wrong. Kings performed. The ephors decided. He was 19 and already drowning in invisible chains. His first decree was simple: new boots for every soldier. The old ones split at the seams. The army limped. He thought it practical, necessary. The ephors said no. Discipline grows from discomfort, they muttered. Let their feet bleed. Lysandros said nothing. He nodded, but he remembered. In the dark, he drew plans. Not war plans, logistics, routes, forges, leather sources. Quiet rebellion, action, without noise. That was the lesson. That was survival. The people watched him like a dog watches thunder, nervous, hopeful it passes. He walked among them. No guards, just cloak and eyes. He saw what his father had ignored. Thin grain, cracked wells, helots with fresh bruises, silence in the marketplace. Not peace, suppression. He said nothing, listened, measured, filed every word in his skull, like a blade behind the teeth. A boy offered him figs. The boy's hands shook. Lysandros took one, ate it. "Thank you," he said. The boy wept. No king had ever thanked him. That night, Lysandros dreamed of the boy dying, not from disease, from decree. His. He woke before dawn. No scream, just breath, cold and slow. He visited the barracks. Soldiers snapped to attention. He waved them down. "Keep resting," he said. They looked confused. Rest was rare. He asked the captain, "What do you need?" The captain laughed, then realized Lysandros wasn't joking. "Oil," the man said. "For joints. Our limbs stiffen like old wood." Lysandros nodded. "You'll have it." That morning, he sent runners to every bathhouse, every merchant, every oil trader. He bartered his personal wealth. Silent again. Quiet loyalty grew, like moss, soft, slow, unkillable. The ephors noticed. They summoned him. "You make moves without us. I act where delay kills," he said. A pause. "You forget your place." I never had one, he replied. Silence. Heavy. One effer, the oldest, leaned in. Do you think you're different? Lysandro stared. No, he said. I think I'm the same, and that terrifies you. The old man said nothing, but his eyes flickered. That night, someone followed Lysandros through the streets. He did not turn. He led them, past the market, through the olive groves, down the dry riverbed. When they attacked, he was ready. 2 men, not soldiers. Too slow, too loud. He broke one's wrist, dislocated the other's knee, left them breathing, barely. He dragged them before the council. Send more skilled ones next time, he said. No one laughed. No one denied it. The message landed. He would not be easy to erase. That week, he visited the Helot quarter. Alone, they watched from doorways, eyes like bruises. He spoke not of mercy, but of order. You live because Sparta stands, and Sparta stands because I do. A man spit near his feet. Lysandros did not react. He left, but that man vanished 3 days later. No blood, no witnesses, just absence. Message sent, message heard. He instituted drills in the fields, not for war, for fire, for flood. The elders scoffed. Fear ghosts, not storms, they said. But when the river flooded a month later, his drills saved 30 families. The elders said nothing, but whispers shifted. The people now said his name with weight, not reverence, but awareness. That was enough. He visited the temple of Artemis, not to pray, to listen. The priestess watched him with hawk eyes. You don't fear gods, she said. I fear silence, he replied. That's where gods live. She smiled, not kindly. You will suffer for that. He nodded. I already do. He left an offering anyway. Not of gold, of his sword. His only sword. The priestess accepted it. She will return this when you need it most, she said. He doubted that, but left it anyway. At the next council, he proposed grain storage expansion. The ephors objected. Wasteful, they said. Planning is not waste, he said. Planning is survival. They delayed, debated. He built it anyway, with his men, by hand, sweat and stone. The people joined him. No orders, just presence. By harvest, the bins were full. By winter, no one starved. The ephors praised him. Wise foresight, they claimed. He smiled, did not correct them. Let them pretend. Let them believe. Power is rarely taken. It is allowed. And once given, it rarely leaves. He began to dress simpler, walk farther, sleep less. He stopped smiling, not out of sorrow, but out of clarity. Smiles were mistaken for softness. He learned to frown with kindness, speak with brevity, look without blinking. A general approached him, offered alliance. Against whom? Lysandros asked. The man blinked. Against whoever threatens us. Then we are already at war, Lysandros said. And left. Alone. Always alone. That was the price. Not the blood. Not the bruises. The silence of companionship. The knowledge that all laughter fades around you. That love bends under the weight of fear. He knew this. Accepted it. But some nights, just some, he remembered the snake in his blanket. The one he called brother. And he wished it had stayed. That maybe it understood more than men ever would. The war came not with drums, but with dust. A border dispute, they called it. A crack in treaty lines. An insult dressed as trade. Whatever the reason, it came. Lysandros did not hesitate. He called his generals at dawn, spoke no more than 20 words, and marched at dusk. The soldiers followed, not because they loved him. They feared his silence more than their enemies' spears. On the second day, rain soaked their cloaks. On the third, they reached the frontier. Villages burned, Smoke tasted like cedar and bone. The enemy was fast, wild, not organized, but fury had teeth. The first clash was brutal. Mud churned underfoot. Screams fell like rain. Lysandros fought in the front, not because it was noble, but because trust is built where blades cross. He killed 5 men that day. One was no older than 12. He looked into that boy's eyes, saw his own reflection. He didn't blink. On the 4th night, they camped by the river. One soldier whispered a hymn to Ares. Lysandros did not pray. He sharpened his blade. Prayer was for those who expected mercy. He expected resistance. On the 7th day, they took the village. Women hid children beneath ash. Men screamed until their throats collapsed. No quarter was given. Sparta did not forget insult. Lysandros ordered burial for the bodies. Even enemies. The soldiers grumbled. "Leave them for the dogs," one said. Lysandros turned. "Just once." "Then dine with dogs," he replied. The soldier dug graves until dawn. On the return march, he walked alone. Eyes on the horizon. Not back. Never back. Back meant memory. Memory meant weakness. When they returned to Sparta, the gates opened in silence. No cheering, just nods. Men returned bloodier, quieter. Women touched their faces in the dark. Lysandros reported to the ephors. "Victory," he said. They nodded. "Efficient," one replied. Another added, "Costly." Lysandros left without responding. He understood. Glory has a balance sheet. Weeks passed. Winter approached. He tightened rations, doubled patrols, forbade fires beyond the outer walls. Paranoia, some said. But when raiders struck 2 nights later, they were met by steel instead of sleep. No one questioned him again. He summoned Helot leaders, not to plead, to warn. "Chaos invites chains," he said. "Keep your kind in order, or I will." They nodded. Not from respect, from calculation. He dismissed them with a glance. No guard escorted them out. Trust was not extended. One helot spat near the threshold. Later, he was found hanging from a tree, not by Lysandros, but by his own kind. Message enforced. Even whispers have ears. Diplomats arrived from Thebes. They brought honeyed words, poisoned gifts. Lysandros met them in the rain. No tent, no fire, just stone and sky. "We seek peace," they said. He stared. "You seek delay. You misunderstand. I choose not to understand." They left with wet cloaks and bruised egos. He watched their backs as they disappeared into the fog. At night, he paced his chambers. Not restless, purposeful, like a lion in tight circles. Strategy requires motion, even if the battle is weeks away. One advisor spoke out. "We must expand, not merely defend." Lysandros nodded. The next day, that advisor led a raid north. He never returned. Message unclear. Perhaps even to Lysandros himself. At temple, he made no offerings. Only sat. Still, the priestess approached. "You come without tribute. I bring silence. Even gods grow tired of silence. Then they may kill me." She laughed. "They will try." His second campaign began in spring. Faster, sharper. He struck before rumors had time to form. 3 cities bent the knee. 1 resisted. He burned it. No survivors, no prisoners. Ash doesn't rebel. On return, he ordered roads rebuilt. Not for beauty, for speed. Soldiers moved where enemies least expected. Bandits vanished, or hung. Order became breath, inescapable. Some called him tyrant, some savior. He ignored both. Titles crumble. Action endures. He slept 4 hours a night, ate little, trusted less. When asked why he pushed so hard, he said, "Because the ground is never still, and I will not sink." The ephors tried to rein him in, called council meetings, demanded pauses. He responded with silence, missed meetings, acted before consensus. One effort vanished. Heart attack, they said. His son disagreed, quietly. He left Sparta soon after. No goodbye. Lysandros walked the city at dusk. Alone. Always alone. Children watched from shadows. Women whispered. Men straightened spines. Even dogs grew silent. He passed like wind through stone. One day, he visited the barracks again. Found a young soldier trembling. The boy expected punishment. Instead, Lysandros handed him a cloak. Fear is fine, he said. Just don't let it lead. The boy wept. Never forgot. Years later, he would die in battle. Wearing that same cloak, Lysandros never mentioned it, but kept the boy's name carved into his table. Alone. Always alone. A merchant asked to paint his likeness. For history, he said. Lysandros refused. If I am remembered, let it be through ash and scar. The merchant painted him anyway, from memory. It was too kind. The king looked almost gentle. Weeks later, that painting was found slashed. No culprit, just canvas and silence. Lysandros said nothing, but the merchant never painted again. At the border, a new enemy stirred. Rumors spoke of fast horses, foreign gods, wild eyes. Lysandros prepared, not with prayers, with maps, with steel, with will, always with will. He trained new units, younger, sharper. He stood among them, taught by doing, bled alongside them. They feared him, but followed because he was always ahead, never behind. One night, a soldier asked, "Do you fear anything?" Lysandros replied, "Only the day I stopped moving," then turned and walked into the dark. The temples began to whisper, at first softly, then with urgency. Oracles refused to meet his gaze. Priests stumbled through their blessings. Even the birds that nested on the columns grew quiet when he passed. Lysandros noticed. He always noticed, but he said nothing. The divine was not his language. His language was action. Stone, steel, silence. But silence was turning against him. At the temple of Apollo, the priestess spilled oil during ritual. A bad omen. Her hands shook. When Lysandros looked at her, she wept. "There is a shadow," she said. "It walks beside you." He did not reply. But that night, he ordered the temple surrounded. Not burned, not defiled, just watched, constantly. Message sent. Fear may whisper, but fear obeys. The next morning, the sun did not rise on time. Clouds choked the horizon. Farmers muttered. The wind changed direction. Crops tilted. Children cried in sleep. One boy carved a spiral into his wall. No one taught him that symbol. No one knew what it meant. Lysandros had the wall destroyed, not the boy. Fear breeds prophecy, he told his council. We will not harvest either. But inside, something stirred. Something old. Not fear. Not quite. Memory of the stories told in hushed tones before sleep. The ones even warriors didn't speak aloud. About shadows that walked behind kings. About curses that smelled like cedar. About gods that bled stone. He dismissed them. Mostly. Until the dreams began. Always the same. A mountain cracking. A river flowing backwards. A child screaming with his voice. He woke with dry mouth and clenched fists. The ephors summoned him. You insult the gods, they said. They are restless. Then let them act, he replied. Words are for cowards. One ephor, youngest, spoke. You risk everything. Lysandros stared. Everything is always at risk. The ephors watched him go. None followed. Not anymore. In the barracks, soldiers trained harder. But even they began to glance skyward. The stars had shifted. Slightly. but enough. One soldier found a deer with 3 eyes. He burned it, didn't tell anyone. But Lysandros knew. He always knew. He summoned the oldest helot he could find, a woman with eyes like cracked bronze. "Tell me the old names," he said. She spat. "You fear them now?" "I don't fear. I prepare." She spoke, slow, in riddles, names not spoken in centuries. Gods older than Olympus, hungrier, quieter. "They don't need worship," she said. "Just silence. And blood." Lysandros dismissed her, but kept the names. He carved them into a stone beneath his bed. Every night, he touched it. Not for protection. For memory. For clarity. The earthquakes began on the 5th week. Small at first, then louder. One cracked the outer wall. No one died, but the message was clear. Sparta was being shaken. From below. From inside. At temple, the priestess of Artemis went blind. Mid-ritual. Screamed until her throat bled. Said she saw a figure with no face, holding a crown of teeth. She died before dawn. Lysandros forbade public mourning. "We honor strength," he said. "Not madness." But the people lit candles anyway. Hundreds. No one stopped them. Not even the guards. In the mountains, a scout vanished. His horse returned without eyes. No wound. Just empty sockets. Lysandros closed the northern pass. Claimed it was for safety. No one argued. They were too afraid. Then came the twins. 2 children found near the well. Naked, silent, eyes completely white. No one knew where they came from. They did not eat, did not blink. When Lysandros approached, they spoke his name in unison. "Lysandros," they said, "the uninvited king." He did not flinch, just ordered them taken. But by morning, they were gone. No trace. Not even footprints. That night, he ordered the temples sealed. No worship. No offerings. Just stone and silence. The Ephors protested. "We need the gods," they said. "Then summon them," he replied. No one did. Days turned heavy. The air thick. Birds stopped singing. Wolves came closer to the city. Children drew spirals in dirt. Always spirals. Always spinning. One old woman screamed for 3 hours straight, then bit off her own tongue. When asked why, she wrote, "So I can't say his name." No one asked which name. They already knew, but no one spoke it. Not even Lysandros. He watched. He waited. He read old scrolls, maps of stars long gone, symbols no longer taught. One scroll mentioned a door beneath Sparta, sealed with 7 stones. He sent men to find it. They did, deep in the crypts. 7 stones. One already cracked. He ordered the area sealed, posted guards, armed, silent. But every morning, one guard was gone. Not dead, just missing. Always the same hour. Always no sound. After the 3rd, he replaced men with dogs. After the 4th dog vanished, he left the door unguarded. No one dared approach. The people began to whisper again. Not about gods, about Lysandros. That he was cursed. That he had invited something. That he ruled not alone. He heard it all. Did nothing. Let the fear grow. Better feared than forgotten. One child approached him, held out a stone. Black. Cold. He said, "You drop this." The child whispered. Lysandros took it. It was warm. He kept it in his cloak, close to the heart. One night, the stars blinked. Just once, but the sky darkened for an hour. No moon, no starlight, just void. People screamed. Animals fled. Lysandros stood on the palace roof, watching. Alone. Always alone. When light returned, his hair had turned gray. No one mentioned it, but everyone noticed. The next day, he addressed the people. "We are not cursed," he said. "We are noticed. There is a difference." Then he walked away, left the silence to settle. At night, he heard whispers from beneath the floor, not voices, something older, slower. He listened, but never answered. Some things were meant only to be heard. When spring returned, the flowers bloomed black. And still, he ruled. Still, he walked. Still, he watched. Always. The days grew longer, but light no longer comforted. People moved quietly, voices low, as if the sky itself listened. Lysandros did not sleep, not because he couldn't, but because he feared what he might see behind his eyelids. Instead, he studied every scroll, every stone carving, every whisper scratched into the walls of forgotten shrines. Beneath the palace, he built a second library. Hidden, guarded, not with warriors, but with silence. Only he held the key. Its name was never spoken. Its contents were older than Sparta, older than kings. One scroll told of a voice beneath the earth that slept for 1,000 seasons, then rose to follow rulers who walked alone. Another told of a blade made of breath, sharpened on regret. He memorized both. The people began to offer prayers to new names. Not gods, but shapes. They drew them on doors, spirals, circles with slashes. The silhouette of an open mouth. Lysandros outlawed them, quietly. But he copied each into a journal he never let anyone touch. At night, he stood atop the citadel. The winds howled. Sometimes they spoke, not with words, with knowing. One night, a child was born with no eyes and no tongue. It breathed, it smiled, it never cried. Lysandros visited, stared. The mother begged him to bless the child. He placed his hand on its head, felt no warmth, only weight. When he left, the child spoke its first word, Lysandros. Though it had no tongue, the mother wept until her hair turned white. He never returned. The palace mirrors were covered, not by order, by instinct. Servants refused to look at their reflections. Some claimed the mirrors showed something else, not what was there, but what waited. He removed all reflective surfaces from his chamber, even water bowls. One advisor spoke of evacuation. "Let us move the people inland," he said. "Abandon the city." Lysandros nodded. The next day, the advisor's tongue was nailed to the city gate, his eyes gouged and filled with salt. No one knew who did it. But no one asked. The gate stood open for 7 days. No flies came, no smell, just silence. Always silence. A woman came to the palace. Old, bent, dressed in feathers and black ash. She said she had walked from the sea, alone, carried no bag, spoke no name. She asked to see Lysandros. No one stopped her. When she entered his chamber, she laughed. "So you are the vessel." He did not blink. "And you are the wave?" "I am the end of breath. Then I am what comes after." She handed him a stone. It pulsed like a heart. Then she vanished. Not walked. Vanished. The stone cracked that night. Inside was dust. He inhaled it, without meaning to. He dreamed of a room made of ribs, a throne of eyes, a crowd that wept backward. He woke screaming. For the first time in years, the next day he decreed that all births must be registered, not for control, for watching. Some children were different now. They blinked at odd moments, laughed at things no one said. Some grew teeth too early. One began speaking in riddles at 3 days old, then stopped breathing. Lysandros had the body preserved in salt, buried beneath the 7th stone. He said nothing. The helots began to disappear. Not flee, disappear. Entire families gone. Houses untouched, no signs. Just dust and spiral carvings on the floor. He called a meeting, invited no one. Sat alone, spoke to the empty room. "I know you are here," he said. "You have tasted this soil. You have wrapped your roots around our bones. But I am no offering. I am the blade you will fear. The walls cracked, then stilled. He left without looking back. The next day, the rivers flowed backward, just for an hour. Enough to remind everyone. No one drank the water. Fires burned green. Crows flew in spirals. One fell dead at his feet, carved with a mark on its beak. He fed it to the dogs. They refused to eat. Lysandros held a ceremony. No occasion, just purpose. He stood before the city, spoke one sentence. We are what survives, then walked away. Behind him, people wept, not from hope, from pressure, from the weight of knowing. That night, he wrote a letter to no one, addressed to the one who waits. In it, he wrote, You may have whispered first, but I have shouted last. Then burned it. Ashes were buried under the throne. The council dissolved, not by decree, by fear. They stopped attending, stopped speaking. One hanged himself with olive branches. Another gouged out his ears. Lysandros ruled alone, completely, unquestioned, but not unchallenged. In the mountains, they heard the hum, deep, endless. Not music, not voice, just intent. A purpose without source. The earth felt tighter, harder, as if holding breath. He dug beneath the palace, found roots where stones should be. They pulsed. He touched one, saw his childhood, his future, his end, all at once. He did not move for hours, then sealed the tunnel behind 13 layers of stone. When a general asked why, he said, Not all doors are meant to be watched. Some must be forgotten. The general left Sparta, disappeared. His name erased from records. His family burned their home. No one spoke of him again. The wind returned, colder, sharper. It carried voices, familiar, twisted. One night, Lysandros heard his mother's lullaby in the breeze. She'd been dead for decades. He did not sleep. He wrote instead. Pages and pages, filled with marks, not words. No one ever read them. No one could. The ink dried red, always red. He never refilled the jar. It never emptied. In the southern quarter, a statue wept. Actual tears, bitter. The stone corroded. Children touched them, fell asleep, didn't wake. 3 days later, they rose, but didn't speak, just stared. Lysandros forbade entry to that part of the city, built walls, not to keep danger out, but to keep it in. The people understood. They moved on. The city adapted, changed, accepted. Fear is air, he is fire. At night, the stars shifted again, formed a symbol, the same carved by the blind woman years ago. It glowed, then faded. Lysandros saw it from his chamber. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, he whispered one word. Soon. They said that kings were chosen by the gods, but the gods had long since turned their faces away. Or perhaps they were watching too closely. Lysandros no longer knew. He no longer asked. The days became dense. Not slow, not fast dense. Like moving through syrup made of dust in memory. The sun hung lower, or seemed to. The light was dimmer, but the fires burned brighter, always brighter, as if compensating for what was being taken away. The people adapted, as they always had. Spartan strength wasn't just physical. It was refusal, to break, to bend, to admit that something had changed. But even refusal has its limits. In the North Quarter, crops refused to grow. The earth rejected seed, turned black, not burnt dead. Lysandros visited, alone. He stood barefoot in the field, felt the soil pulse under his heels. Not with life, with warning. He returned without a word. That night, the entire field was set ablaze. No soldiers, no orders, just flame. and the scent of salt. When questioned, he said, "It is not what we plant, it is what we leave behind, and nothing more." The temples began to crack, literally. Hairline fractures along marble faces, statues lost fingers, altars wept sap. The priests declared a cleansing. Lysandros watched in silence as they burned offerings, then themselves, one by one. No screams, just smoke. He kept the ashes, stored them beneath the Alice in jars, marked only with the symbol of an open mouth, the same from the spiral carvings. The helots began humming, not in unison, not in tune, but in timing. Always at dusk, always for exactly 17 minutes. When asked why, they shrugged, said they didn't notice, said they hadn't. But they always did. Lysandros listened, memorized the notes, repeated them under his breath in the council chamber. The chamber echoed, though empty. He slept less, ate less, saw more. He said the walls spoke, not metaphor, literal. Whispers in stone, cracks that breathed. Sometimes they bled. He painted them with wax. The wax turned black. He didn't remove it, let it stay. A reminder. Of what? He never said. Children began drawing symbols in the sand. Eyes with no pupils. Hands with too many fingers. Trees growing upside down. They laughed while drawing, then forgot. Hours later, they would not remember holding sticks, or being at the beach, or having names. For minutes at a time, they were blank. Then normal again. Lysandros documented each one. His journal grew thick. His hands grew thin. Bones pressed skin. Eyes dimmed. But his presence grew heavier. People bowed not from duty, but gravity. It hurt to look at him. Not because of brightness, because of echo. As if he carried every scream, never screamed. At night, he walked the corridors, alone. He spoke to no one. Yet voices answered. They called him carrier, called him unasked, called him return. He replied with a whisper, "Not yet." The mirrors were long gone, but sometimes reflections still appeared. In puddles, on blades, in windows that should have shown nothing. They always looked away before meeting his gaze, except one, a girl of 8. She met his eyes in a reflection, smiled, then bled from her nose, then mouth, then collapsed. No cause found, no breath, no return. Lysandros carried her body to the mountain, left her on a stone slab, said nothing. The next morning the slab was empty, but her name was etched in the stone, in her own handwriting. She had never learned to write, at least not here. The sky changed, subtly. The blue deepened, stars rearranged, patterns no one remembered, but all felt. Sleeplessness became common, not restlessness, just the inability to close eyes, as if the world required watching, as if dreams had teeth. Lysandros stopped holding audiences. People still gathered, just to see the closed doors, to breathe the air near him. They said it tasted like iron and fire and something old, something before memory. Rites began to shift. Weddings required silence. Births required shadow. Deaths required fire. Always fire. Even rain couldn't douse it. The flames burned beneath the drops, hissed but held. The scribes recorded less. Their hands shook. Words refused to stay on parchment. Ink ran. Scrolls decayed overnight. Lysandros decreed memory be spoken, not written, from mouth to ear, story to story, but always in whisper. Loud voices, cracked glass. Twice, they cracked skulls. He replaced the council with stones, 12, arranged in a circle. He spoke to them, waited, listened. Sometimes he nodded, sometimes he wept. He named them, each after a fear: hunger, silence, forgetting, return, fire, echo, bone, stillness, water, dust, waking, and one. No one knew which was one, but it was always last, always warm. He built a chamber around them, lit with a single flame, never flickering, never changing. No one entered but him. He aged without aging, hair grayed, skin thinned, but he moved like stone, unbreaking, unchanging, unforgiving. He wore black, always black, but not cloth, something else, unnamed, unwoven. It moved like smoke, but held like armor. He said it was a gift. From the first dream, he never explained. The people stopped asking. Those who asked too much vanished. Not killed, not punished, just gone, as if they had never been. Memories of them faded. Faces blurred, names slipped. The city shrank, but felt fuller, as if something else filled the gaps. Something watching. The animals knew. Dogs no longer barked. Cats stared into corners. Birds flew in circles, then dropped. No predator, just gravity reversed. Lysandro said nothing. Watched. Always watched. One night, he stood atop the palace, eyes closed, arms open. The wind howled, then stopped. Complete stillness across the city. No leaves moved, no breath exhaled. In that silence, he spoke one word. No one heard it, but all felt it. A shiver, a crack, a shift. The next morning, the river ran red. Not blood, just color. But no fish, no ripple, just flow. A child dipped her hand in, pulled out bone, smiled, said, "He sees." Then forgot, went back to play. No one questioned. Lysandros burned the records, all of them, every scroll, every statue, every map. He said, "We are not where we were." And he was right. Sparta had moved. Not on land. In meaning, in shape, in memory. And he, the king, the keeper, the blade, and the wound, he stood in the center. Unmoving, unyielding, unseen, but never not present. Always watching, always watched, always the return. Time had begun to forget its path in Sparta. Days no longer followed nights with discipline. Shadows stretched too long, or vanished too soon. The sun sometimes rose in silence, a pale disk with no heat, and other times it blinked out midday, plunging the city into a dusk that never fully deepened. People no longer marked days by meals or prayers, but by strange silences and the sudden sound of things breaking: vases, bones, the breath of a dying bird. The city had developed a rhythm of rupture. Lysandros stood in the midst of it all, like the eye of a collapsing storm. No longer merely king, he had become gravity. Old men, who once questioned his reforms, now shuffled around the palace walls in mute reverence. They traced spirals in dust, with fingers worn to the bone. They did not remember why they had come, but they knew they could not leave. Children were born without cries. Women carried them silently to the edge of the mountains, where voices were forbidden. There, the infants would wail, but not from pain. They wailed ancient songs, in tongues no one taught. Lysandros heard them in his sleep, except he did not sleep. Not anymore. Sleep had left him the night he saw his reflection in a blade of grass. Not on it, within it. A reflection that blinked before he did. Since then, he closed his eyes, but his mind remained open, wide, unshuttered, full of voices not his own. The spiral chamber beneath the palace grew colder. 12 stones remained, and the 13th one had started to hum. Softly at first, then with resonance. The entire palace shook with its song. Walls cracked, dust rose, and the song did not stop. One day, Lysandros entered the chamber barefoot. and bled with every step. He lay flat before the stones and whispered the name he never shared. The humming paused, then resumed in a new key, higher, sharper. Bones in the city ached, dogs howled, and then were never seen again. The river stopped flowing for one day and one night, then reversed. Fish returned, but they had no eyes. Still, the people ate them. They were hungry for anything that remembered the old world. The stars above Sparta began to blink, not twinkle blink, as if watching, as if deciding. Lysandros had the astronomers brought to the palace. He asked them for their theories. None answered. Their mouths had sewn shut in the night, threadless, bloodless, final. He let them go. They walked into the hills, never returned. Sparta stopped growing food. The soil rejected metal and memory. Tools rusted before sunrise. Famas vanished at dusk. Fuse grew rocks, sharp, symmetrical rocks that bled when broken. Lysandros collected them, arranged them into patterns only he understood. Spirals again. Concentric, nested, unending. Travelers came, curious, brave, foolish. They spoke of the king who did not die, of the city that did not age. They arrived with maps and left with madness. Those who survived told tales of voices in the wind, of time lost between steps, of seeing their own deaths in puddles. No one believed them, but they never stopped shaking. Lysandros watched from his high tower. He no longer ate, no longer breathed as others did. His heart beat slowly, once every 9 minutes. When it did, a bell rang in the deep chambers of the palace. No one rang it. It just happened. The guards kept count. When the bells slowed, people wept. When they paused, the entire city held its breath. Lysandros did not speak for months. Then, one morning, he stood on the palace wall and spoke a single sentence. The one has remembered. No one asked what that meant. They bowed, deep, as if gravity increased. That day, the birds stopped flying. Forever. They walked, hopped, crawled, but did not lift into the sky. The clouds hung lower. Rain came sideways, sometimes upward. A girl drew a circle on her wall. It could not be erased, not by water, fire, blade, or silence. Her parents locked the room. She drew it again on her pillow, on her skin. It began to glow. Lysandros summoned her. She was unafraid. She stared through him, not at him. She touched his chest. "You are the map," she said, then vanished. In full daylight, in front of the Council of Stones, she left only the scent of time. From that day on, the palace halls smelled of time. No one questioned. The stones began to hum in harmony. The one glowed faintly, pulsing with the rhythm of the king's breath. People saw things in the light memories, not theirs. Moments from lives they never lived. Joys they never earned. Pains they never suffered. They cried anyway, and did not know why. The temples were now empty, but full. Statues had melted. Altars had cracked, but presence remained. Priests no longer preached. They stood still for hours, then collapsed, their bodies light as ash. Lysandros kept their sandals. He placed them at the palace gates. None matched, but all pointed inward. The wind spoke now, in clicks, in tones, in breath. It touched only the king's window. His curtains fluttered while others hung limp. He wrote messages in the wind, with charcoal, on silk. They vanished when finished, but the air changed. Softer, hungrier. At night, he lay on stone. No bed, no warmth. He hummed the song of one. The walls hummed back. A resonance grew. People outside the palace felt it in their teeth, in their bones. Babies cried in harmony, then silence, then laughter. Then silence again. The stones in the chamber began to shift, slowly, imperceptibly. But they moved. Patterns changed. The spiral broke, then reformed. New, higher, deeper. He watched, never touched. One cracked. From top to base. A hairline. A warning. Or a promise. Lysandros placed his hand on it. Closed his eyes. When he opened them, he wept. Not tears. Blood. Not pain. Memory. He remembered things before Sparta, before kings, before words. His body shook. Not with fear. With return. The people saw him the next day. He walked among them, barefoot, cloaked in light, not bright pale, like moonlight before the flood. They did not speak, just followed. He led them to the mountain, the one that once judged newborns. He stood at its peak, opened his arms, said, "This is not ascent. This is remembering." The ground trembled. The wind reversed. The stars blinked twice. Then the sky split. For a moment, just a moment, all saw, not with eyes, with memory, with bone. Then it closed. The sky healed. Lysandros knelt, and for the first time in years slept. The people carried him back, in silence. The spiral chamber dimmed. The one stone glowed. The hum stopped. Time paused, then resumed. Different, bent, forged, and Sparta lived on. As echo, as witness, as breath held too long. Waiting. The silence in Sparta was no longer absence. It had become presence. A weight. A pulse. Streets echoed with footsteps that had not been taken. Markets stood full but unmanned, goods unbought, coins untouched. The walls of homes bore handprints charred, ancient, child-sized. They pulsed faintly in moonlight. No one questioned them. The city no longer asked questions. Lysandros moved less now, but when he did, his shadow moved differently. Sometimes ahead of him, sometimes behind, sometimes not at all. People saw it and looked away, not out of fear, but reverence. They spoke less. Their tongues thickened. Some could only hum. The song of one had entered their bones. It emerged in the sound of sweeping, in the creak of doors, in the crackle of dying fires. A rhythm beyond understanding. The palace grew, but not through labor. Its stones rearranged. Rooms vanished. Corridors bent. The spiral chamber had new passages now narrow, dark, warm with breath, not one's own. Those who entered them often returned older. Some returned younger. Some did not return. The air within held memories. It whispered names never spoken aloud. It knew you. Lysandros sat often before the one stone. It no longer hummed. It pulsed slow, steady, like a second heart beneath the world. He spoke to it, not aloud. Through breath, through blood, it answered in dreams. Dreams he shared with no one. But the people felt them. They built shrines without instruction. Circles of ash, piles of bones arranged like eyes. They did not know why, only that it felt correct. The moon no longer obeyed cycles. Some nights there were two, some nights none. Once the moon turned red and hissed. That night, everyone wept. Even the goats, even the trees, even the stones. Lysandros watched from the tower. His eyes reflected nothing, not light, not form. They showed distance, deep and vast, and inside out. He saw beyond Sparta, beyond breath. He saw endings not yet written. The people had stopped aging. Their skin no longer wrinkled. Their bones held firm, but their memories decayed. Names forgotten, faces blurred. Only the song remained. A girl drew it in the dirt with her foot. A perfect spiral. She danced around it. The wind followed. Her shadow split in two. One smiled. The other watched. Lysandro summoned her. She did not arrive. She was already there, standing behind him, silent, smiling. He asked her name. She said, "You gave it to me." He did not remember, but nodded. She vanished. The next morning, every well in Sparta ran dry, then overflowed, with ink, black, thick, sweet. People drank it, and remembered other lives, other cities, other deaths. They wept, then laughed, then forgot again. The ink dried, the wells sealed. The spiral chamber changed again. The one stone cracked further. The crack glowed. Voices echoed from within. Not words, memories. Shared. Unwanted. True. Lysandros touched it. His hand bled. The blood hissed. It did not fall. It rose. Into the crack. Feeding it. Healing it. Or worsening it. No one knew. No one dared speak. Not even him. Birds returned. But they were wrong. Their wings bent backward. Their songs were reversed. They flew in spirals. Tight, endless spirals. Over the palace. Over the stone. They did not stop. They did not sleep. One flew into a window. Did not break the glass. Broke itself. Shattered like clay. Inside was not bone, but sand. White. Warm. Alive. The priests gathered it. Burned it. Inhaled the smoke. Their eyes turned black. Their voices deepened. They chanted. The sky answered. It cracked. Briefly. Light spilled through. Not daylight. Something else. Something curved. Lysandros smiled. The people bowed. Not to him. To the crack. The palace bells began to toll themselves. Random. Uneven. But meaningful. People wept at their sound. Others danced. Some floated. For seconds. Then collapsed. The ground became soft. Not like mud like memory. You stepped and forgot. Each step cost a thought. A name. A moment. People began to crawl, holding onto stone, onto each other, onto breath. They carved spirals into skin, to remember, to return. Lysandros no longer felt time. He wandered the halls, and found himself younger, older, the same. He met himself once, in the mirror, but the reflection was weeping. He touched the glass. It cracked. He did not. That day, rain fell upward, soft, warm. It smelled of honey. It tasted like regret. Children opened their mouths, caught drops, spoke words they never learned, words that made dogs howl, that made birds fall, that made the one stone glow brighter. The spiral chamber opened a new path, downward, into warmth, into song. Lysandros entered. Alone. He found a room of eyes, hundreds, open, watching, seeing. No bodies, just eyes, on pedestals, on walls, on air. They blinked, in rhythm, with his heart. He stood among them. He wept. They watched. They did not judge, only remembered. He touched one. It closed. A door opened. He stepped through, found himself on a mountain. But the mountain was inside. He looked up, saw the sky below, saw the city above, saw the spiral beneath his feet. It moved, slowly, patiently. The mountain hummed. He hummed with it. They became one. For a moment, just a breath. Then he returned. The palace was empty, but full. His people stood in silence, their eyes closed, their mouths open, singing, without sound, without effort. The one stone rose, floated, spun, cracked, and then paused, waiting, breathing, with him, through him, because of him. The girl returned, older, wiser, same. She touched his chest, said almost. He nodded, then vanished, not with light, but with understanding. The people did not cry. They bowed and waited for the next breath, for the next spiral, for the final forgetting, for the truth. The mountain no longer ended where it began. Its base was sky. Its peak was silence. Lysandros stood on both. He breathed neither air nor fire, but time. It settled on his skin like ash, like prayer, like forgetting. Beneath him, Sparta inverted itself. Houses sank. Shadows climbed. Roads coiled like serpents made of memory. The spiral had grown teeth. It chewed meaning and exhaled fog. That fog settled over every field, every child, every goat, every tool, erasing lines, blurring purpose, turning warriors into sleepwalkers and mothers into myths. No one remembered war, only waiting. The waiting stretched between meals, between words, between blinks. It hummed. The people hummed back. Some still held plows, but the soil refused them. Some sharpened swords, but the metal bent soft. Nothing was needed anymore, except stillness. The one stone hovered now constantly, above the altar of absence. It dripped ink, not blood. That ink pooled into patterns. Those patterns spoke, in silence, in the minds of those who stared long enough. Some heard commands, others heard laughter. Few heard their own names and wept until they disappeared. Not disappeared, like smoke, like lies. Lie. Sandros no longer slept. He no longer closed his eyes. His gaze was open, always. His mouth, unmoving, echoed truths from centuries ahead. His feet did not touch ground, but memory. He walked through minds, not streets, entered hearts, not rooms. The palace was gone, but its echo remained. A hum in the chest, a cold in the spine, a pull at the teeth. Children drew spirals in dust. The dust shimmered and rose, formed wings, flew into the sun, and were never seen again. But the sun flinched. The clouds hissed. Rain came again. Heavy, sharp. It whispered numbers. Always 13. Over and over. No one counted aloud. No one had mouths anymore. Only breath. Only pulse. The city had no borders. It was a feeling. It was inside you. It was the moment you forgot your mother's face. It was the blink before waking. It was the hum you never noticed until it stopped. Lysandros spoke once. Only once. The words were not words. They were shape. Sound. Gravity. The stones bent. The wells sang. The sky cracked wide and revealed teeth. They grinned, then vanished. That day, the goats knelt. The rivers flowed backward. The wind braided itself into rope and tied the towers together. No one climbed. No one dared. The spiral now had layers. Deep. Endless. People who entered the lower turns forgot who they were, then what they were, then why they were. Some emerged, glowing, empty, smiling. They sat in circles and stared at each other until the moon blinked. That was the signal. They began to hum. Not song, not chant. Vibration. It cracked mirrors. It healed bones. It called things from the woods. Not animals, not men. Things. They came on all fours. Or none. They came. They bowed to Lysandros, then vanished. Their scent remained. It smelled of salt and sorrow. The girl returned. Younger. Eyes older than the sun. She carried a box. It opened inward. It showed not contents, but context. Those who looked saw their deaths, their births, their true names. They screamed and became dust. She gave it to Lysandros. He did not look. He placed it on his throne. The throne sank into the floor, then rose into the sky, both at once. The girl smiled. The people wept, for joy, for release, for nothing. The stars grew larger, closer, loud. They sang to the one stone. It cracked, opened, revealed a heart, beating, not organ, concept. The people touched it with thought. It pulsed. Once. They fainted. Lysandros watched. He bled from his ears, not in pain, but in sacrifice. He offered the sound of his name. It was accepted. He no longer had a name. He was event, echo, law. The rivers began to hum. Fish floated. Birds flew underwater. Trees whispered in tongues. The spiral collapsed, then expanded, took the shape of a man. The people bowed. Lysandros walked into the image. It enveloped him, consumed him. He became outline, then voice, then memory. The city sighed. The sky laughed. The ground turned to glass. Every step a reflection, every shadow a truth. The goats vanished. Their bells remained, floating, ringing, forever. A child was born, eyes already closed, mouth already open. She sang the spiral, perfectly. The girl nodded. The bells rang in rhythm. The stars blinked once, then again, then never again. The one stone crumbled. Its pieces floated, became teeth, became stars, became rules. Lysandros smiled. His last act, not ending, not departure. A shift. The people opened their arms. They did not embrace. They received the memory, the burden, the truth. Then silence, not quiet. Silence. Living, breathing, pulsing. The new king stood, not chosen, not born, formed, of ash, of ink, of humming. He did not speak. He did not need to. He was spiral. He was city. He was what remained. And he waited. For the next forgetting. For the next breath. Time in Sparta did not move. It coiled. Around wrists. Around thoughts. Around the breath before speech. Lysandros stood at its center. Or perhaps its origin. Or maybe he had never moved. The air tasted of yesterday. The soil crumbled with futures not yet born. People stopped asking when they were. Only where. Then not even that. Names faded first. Then roles. Then hunger. The city became song. One long note, held by no voice, stretched across every window, every crack, every unspoken question. It was felt more than heard. The mountains wept in silence, their peaks shrinking, as if bowing. Snow fell, then reversed, returning to clouds with apology. Seasons no longer alternated, only lingered. A permanent dusk, the kind that makes you unsure if you should light a fire or go to bed. Lysandros no longer aged. His beard grew, then receded. His skin tightened, then loosened. His heartbeat synchronized with the spiral's pulse, which had become the sky itself. Above, constellations rearranged nightly. They formed eyes, then hands, then mouths, then warnings, then silence again. The people stopped building. Their hands forgot the motion. Instead, they shaped air, molding breath into forms. Some became birds, others mistake S. They vanished, but the air remembered. Each shape left behind a memory, and the city swelled with memory. It dripped from walls. It pooled in corners. Memory without owner, without anchor. It tasted like copper. It stung like betrayal. Children played with it. Adults wept before it. Elders swallowed it, hoping to forget what they had forgotten. The temples collapsed. No one noticed. The gods had long stopped watching. Or perhaps they too had coiled, wrapped into the spiral, now pulsing from beneath every step. One child placed their ear to the earth. They screamed, then smiled, then whispered a name no one had taught them. The name burned into air. Letters hung like smoke, refusing to dissipate. Lysandros read it. He blinked. Once. And the palace returned. Not built. Not conjured. Remembered. Room by room. Hall by hallway. Each filled with echoes. Laughter that never happened. Footsteps never taken. The spiral reappeared in the floor. Only now it spun upward. Into the ceiling. Into the sky. Into the mind. Those who looked up too long forgot their families. Those who looked down forgot themselves. Those who closed their eyes remembered things they should never know. Lysandros sat upon no throne. He stood within a circle, neither prisoner nor god, just center. He breathed in futures, exhaled consequence. His breath bent trees, wilted truths. A girl approached, perhaps the same, perhaps reborn. Her shadow was older than the sun. She carried no box, no prophecy, just silence. She handed it to him. He opened it. It screamed, without sound. Lysandros nodded. The city flickered, like thought, like hesitation, like blinking too fast and catching something behind the veil. People paused mid-step, mid-word, mid-death. Everything held its breath. The air turned dense, soft, like wool soaked in meaning, and then release. The wind returned. It sang lullabies in languages lost to time. The trees swayed in agreement. The rivers flowed clockwise again. The sun rose, but stopped halfway. Hovered, watching, curious, afraid. The people gathered in circles, not instructed, not commanded, drawn by pulse, by rhythm, by something beneath the bones. They hummed, a new note, higher, sharper. It cracked mirrors, then healed them. Each shard reflected a different face of Lysandros. Young, old, beast, light. None true, all true. He walked through them, one by one. Each reflection whispered a truth. He nodded to each. The final one spoke his childhood name. He smiled. That smile carved itself into the palace wall. It remained still, even when the wall is gone. The spiral changed again, now made of breath. Each inhalation added a step. Each exhalation removed one. The people walked it carefully, deliberately. Some reached the center. Fewer returned. Those who did brought no eyes, only voices. They spoke in triplets, each word layered with 3 meanings. They were feared, but loved, but feared. One of them whispered into a tree. It bloomed immediately, then died, then bloomed again. A cycle began. Plants followed, then animals, then thought. All began cycling. Creation, death, return, without pause, without judgment, only rhythm. The earth cracked, gently, not in anger, in birth. Something new emerged, a sphere, smooth, cold, alive. It pulsed with memory. The people gathered, watched, waited. Lysandros touched it. It dissolved. Into wind, into skin, into truth. His body lit like dusk on bronze. His voice returned. One word. Continue. And so the spiral grew. Into sky. Into soul. Into story. The city no longer knew its own shape. Streets bent inward, then looped, then unfolded into staircases that ascended into fog and never returned. Windows opened into dreams. Doors led to memories. Trees grew backward, their roots reaching skyward, searching for forgotten stars. Lysandros walked without footsteps. Each movement a suggestion, each blink an echo. His form no longer distinct, at times a figure, at times a shimmer, often a pause in time itself. The people did not bow anymore. They listened. To what? The wind, the hum, the stillness that followed every breath. Their language had condensed into symbols, spirals carved on skin, lines tattooed onto palms. When they spoke in gestures, in flickers of eye, in the way their shadow leaned. Communication had become vibration. The girl returned, always the same, always different, her eyes deeper now, hollow wells of potential. She led the children to the hills, where stones floated and sang. They sat, learned to hum the frequencies of hunger, of history, of the heartbeat of rocks. One child blinked too long and returned with a crown of feathers that whistled in rain. The sky noticed. It grew teeth again, white, wide, silent. It watched. Lysandros climbed no mountain. He entered none. The mountain came to him. It bent low, exhaled mist, whispered old names into his lungs. He coughed stars. The mist turned to ink. He drank it. His voice darkened. When he spoke, time rippled. Not forward, RD, not back, outward, into the bones of listening goats, into the veins of distant clouds, into the buried weapons of forgotten wars. That voice carved a path through the city. The buildings parted. The wind stood still. Birds hovered mid-flap, mid-thought. The girl walked ahead. Her footsteps left roots. Flowers grew from them instantly, then died, then bloomed again. The cycle was everywhere now, a breath and a grave, a seed and a scream. The people did not fear it. They named it, gently, as one names a storm already overhead. Lysandros stood at the edge of the unbuilt tower, the tower not made of stone but remembrance. Each level a layer of past, of blood, of silence. He ascended by breathing. With each breath, a memory unfolded beneath him. His mother, a feast, a broken sword, a promise, a child he never held, a name he once feared. They swirled, became steps, became wind. He stood at the top. There was no top, just perspective. Below, the city folded again, into a circle, into a pulse, into a question. He answered it with stillness. The answer was accepted. The sky sighed. Rain fell again, sharp, sweet, remembering. It landed on tongues that tasted not water, but memory. The children caught it in jars. Each drop whispered a secret. They listened, then grew older. In minutes, the spiral now glowed. Not visibly, in the chest, in the ache, before tears. It guided movements. Lovers circled it before touching. Elders danced it before sleeping. Warriors traced it before forgetting why they fought. Lysandros now spoke in weather. Storms followed his breath, thunder his blink. When he slept, if he slept, the earth shook gently. A lullaby for roots, a tremor of ancient songs. The girl sat beside him one night. She held his hand. It crumbled into feathers. He smiled. She did not. She whispered something in reverse. He understood. He wept. The tears fell upward. The stars drank them and pulsed. One burst, became a bird. It flew. It burned. It sang the name of a mountain not yet born. The city leaned to listen. Every wall tilted. Every roof lowered. The spiral swelled with breath. It spun. Faster. Softer. Always inward. Lysandros stepped into it. Not physically. Not mentally. Entirely. He folded into concept. Became a verb. An instruction. a feeling before language. The people felt it. They grew quieter, softer, stronger. Eyes no longer needed to see, only remember. They remembered his face. It changed. Into theirs. Into all. Into none. He was not king now. He was contour. He was the pause between thunder and fear. He was how stone remembers touch. He was why goats avoid mirrors. He was what dust sings before falling. The girl rose. She walked into the wind. It parted, honored her, feared her. She vanished, or perhaps became the horizon. The people did not search, only waited. The spiral spoke now, in colors, in decay, in warmth behind closed eyes. It guided those who dared. Many returned. Some did not. Those who returned had no voices, just breath. It was enough. They breathed together. A song formed. It echoed across hills, across time. It reached Lysandros, wherever he now was, and he smiled. Not with mouth, with memory. There was no longer day or night, only the murmur of the spiral folding into itself. The city had become a resonance, a chamber where thoughts echoed before they were born. People moved, not by walking, but by memory of movement. Even the animals no longer acted by instinct, but by recollection of ancient hunts. Now symbolic gestures in still fields. Lysandros existed in fragments, not broken, dispersed. In the rustle of leaves, he was decision. In the cracks of stone, regret. In the breath of sleeping goats, forgiveness. His name was no longer spoken. It was intuited, felt in the pause before speech, in the tremble between yes and no. The people called this phase the unraveling, though no one had taught them the term. The spiral had entered their dreams. It whispered lessons, not commands, not stories, shapes, pulses, absence. They awoke with tears, or laughter, or silence. All were appropriate. The temples returned, not rebuilt, but remembered into being. Columns made of repetition, roofs of intention, altars of forgotten promises. Sacrifices were no longer needed. The act of kneeling sufficed. The ground absorbed the gesture and responded in rain. The elders began to float, only slightly, an inch above the soil. Their shadows remained anchored. The young watched in reverence. They began to dig, not graves, not wells, just deep, into thought, into earth, into places before definition. One child found a mirror. In it, no face, only spiral. She held it to the sun. The sun blinked and sighed. A soft warmth settled over the city, like memory softened by time. Trees leaned inward, their trunks curving to shelter those who wept. Birds stopped singing. They began to hum, a single note. It harmonized with breath, with the wind brushing moss, with the thunder that rolled but never arrived. Lysander, now, a concept, drifted through this song. He did not observe. He was observation. He did not command. He was the pause in which decisions formed. The spiral, grown vast, now filled the sky. Not visually. It coiled in the minds of all. It adjusted dreams, redirected regret, calmed the unborn. One night, or what passed for night, the people gathered on the hillside that no longer cast shadow. They brought nothing. They expected nothing. Still, something arrived. A figure, or light, or echo. It stood where Lysandros once stood. It did not speak, but all heard. Now begins the return, said the wind. Not backwards, not undoing, just reweaving. Threads that frayed, now intertwined. Names that faded now glimmered faintly. Emotions without source found anchor. A goat lifted its head. It wept. It understood. The spiral contracted, then pulsed. Once, twice, then held. Suspended. A tension without threat. A possibility. The city inhaled. Every wall. Every blade of grass. Every person. Together. A stillness deeper than death. Then release. The spiral inverted. It folded inward so tightly, it vanished. But its shape remained. In bones. In soil. In language. The people did not mourn. They planted. Seeds made from tears, from hair, from unspoken dreams. The earth accepted them. They bloomed into colors no eye had words for. Lysandros was those colors. Not all, just the ones that shimmered in doubt. That lingered. That made people pause and smile without knowing why. The children learned to sculpt time with hands coated in pollen. They shaped hours into domes, minutes into ladders, seconds into songs. They gave time to the birds. The birds shared it with the mountains. The mountains sang, low, deep, ancient. The girl returned. Her feet left no mark. Her eyes now held oceans. When she blinked, waves crashed somewhere. She sat beside the tree grown from memory and offered no words. Instead, she placed her hand upon the bark. It sang her name, and hers alone. For the first time she wept. The spiral had taken her once. It returned her differently. Not more, not less. Just truth. Lysandros watched. Not from above. Not from within. But as presence. As scent before storm. As calm before revelation. He reached into the soil. Found his own name buried. He left it there. Names had served. They were not needed now. The spiral, though unseen, had not vanished. It now lived in rhythms, in the gap between thunder and echo, in the way lips hesitated before a kiss, in the silence after laughter. It was everywhere, and nowhere perfect. The people understood. They no longer worshipped. They no longer feared. They simply remembered. And remembering was enough. The goats built nothing, but they gathered around the humming stones. They felt warm, safe, known. The birds carried messages, not written, not spoken, just weight, just intention, delivered through shadow. The mountains grew tired. They rested, shrunk, became hills, then beds. The sky grew curious. It lowered itself gently, touched the tops of tallest trees. They bowed, grateful. The city dissolved, not into ruin, into story, into memory, into spiral. He was not born into power. He was born into silence. A silence so complete it rang louder than any Spartan trumpet. The chamber of his birth held no light, only the breath of waiting ancestors. His first cry was not a sound. It was an offering. The midwives did not smile. They marked him. Not with ink, not with words, but with the absence of both. A child of the interval, of the pause. They knew. He would not be king. He would be repetition. And so he was named. Not in language, but in lineage. A sigh passed down from fathers who were not fathers, only carriers of weight. In Sparta, you did not inherit the throne. You inherited the fracture that came with it. The crown was not metal. It was forgetting. Forgetting who you loved. Forgetting what hunger meant. Forgetting why laughter ever mattered. Lysandros felt this even as a child. He watched his own shadow detach. It did not follow him. It waited. Ahead. Anticipating. Teachers came, not to teach, but to refine removal. They taught him to sit still while his body ached to run, to stand tall while his knees buckled under absence, to speak only when the silence had become unbearable for others, then to speak softer still. Discipline was not the lesson. It was the air. He breathed rules, inhaled them with the dust of training yards. the sweat of other boys who would never be kings but always bleed for one. He was not cruel, but he was becoming something that could not afford kindness. Kindness had memory, and memory cracked thrones. They taught him about gods, not prayers, just their habits, their tempers, their shapes when glimpsed in firelight. He was told one day he might become as such. He knew they lied. Gods had freedom. Kings had echoes. At night, he dreamed in stone. The city spoke to him through walls. "Repeat us," they said. "Remember us, by becoming us." He would wake, weep, without knowing, then train, then forget he wept. His mother, or the woman they called so, faded early, not in death, in presence. She remained in form but no longer held identity. Her eyes did not recognize him, only the outline of obligation. He kissed her hand once. It turned to salt. He never tried again. They introduced him to the old king, a man carved of shadow and expectation. The meeting was not a meeting. It was a reflection. He looked into older eyes and saw the exhaustion he would one day wear. "Rule nothing," the man said. "Become what rules." That was all. It was enough. They crowned him with silence. Again, the ceremony was breathless, not a word spoken. The people watched with eyes lowered, not in reverence, in caution. They had seen kings. They had seen them disappear, some quickly, some slowly, all thoroughly. Lysandro stood in the Hall of Echoes. The throne beneath him groaned. It remembered too many names. It longed for rest. He denied it, because he was taught to, because he must, because to sit was to bind yourself to the never-ending moment of before. He did not walk the city walked him. It shaped itself to his memories, real or imagined. Streets widened when he recalled freedom, narrowed when he felt fear. Walls whispered names he'd never spoken but always known. A girl gave him a flower. It turned to ash before touching his hand. She apologized. He thanked her. Both knew the exchange had no meaning. It was ritual. Ritual was what remained when truth became too fragile. He dined with warriors. They toasted without wine. Cups lifted in pantomime. His appetite was disciplined, his hunger scheduled. He did not taste food, only duty. At night, he watched the stars not to wonder, but to confirm their obedience. They aligned as they should. He slept without dreams, or if dreams came, they were structured, measured, pre-approved by the rhythm of his bloodline. In one, he stood at a cliff and waited for a tide that never arrived. In another, he held a child made of fog. It wept. He offered it nothing. It wept more, then vanished. His advisors spoke in half-truths and full rituals. They did not advise. They echoed. He echoed back. The court became a chamber of delayed thoughts. Every decision predetermined by ghosts. Every gesture weighted by precedent. He hated none of them. Hate required flame. He was cold wind. They feared him not for his power, but his clarity. He was inevitable. A consequence, not a man. He aged without changing. His face remained, his eyes dulled. Not with age, with repetition. He watched generations bloom and wither in his peripheral. He never turned to mourn. That would be deviation. He buried no sons. He claimed no daughters. He held no one except silence. Always silence. It was his inheritance, his companion, his name. The throne was not carved from marble or oak, but from the weight of decisions never made. It pulsed when he sat, a low vibration in his spine, like a memory trying to crawl up into thought. Lysandros no longer questioned it. He had learned that questions created fractures, and fractures let in light. Light revealed too much. The throne did not offer comfort. It offered alignment. The spine aligned with law. the jaw with silence, the heart with duty, the hands with stillness. He once tried to shift his posture. The chair groaned. The city blinked. 3 chickens died without cause. He did not move again. Each morning he awoke before the sun, not to greet it, but to anticipate it. A king who was surprised by the dawn was already dethroned. He sat before the mirror of stone, not to see himself, but to recall the absence of reflection. A face is a liability in Sparta. It gives people ideas. Familiarity breeds memory, and memory in a king becomes opinion. Opinions fracture systems. So his face became a suggestion, something glimpsed in profile, echoed in statues, replicated only in shadow. His meals were rituals. The same bread, the same olive, the same measure of water. No flavor, only sustenance. Taste invites preference. Preference invites instability. He chewed deliberately, each motion a contract. The walls observed, not with eyes, but with knowledge. They remembered every prior ruler's hesitation, every tremble of uncertainty. Lysandros gave them nothing new. In the council chamber, he sat at the center of a circle. The circle was precise, geometrically perfect. No entrance, no exit. Ideas entered, were discussed, and then returned to their origin, altered only by the ritual of circulation. Nothing decided, everything agreed upon in advance. The council spoke in turns, each voice a variation of a theme. Lysandros nodded when appropriate. He did not speak often. When he did, it was in formulations. Statements that resembled riddles but were merely condensed repetitions of doctrine. The river does not flow because it chooses. It flows because it must. They bowed at such words, not in agreement, in relief. Predictability is divine. On day a boy entered the hall, barefoot, unwashed, eyes open too wide. He shouted, "You are not a king. You are a statue with breath." The guards moved. Lysandros raised a hand. The room froze. He walked to the boy, looked into his eyes, saw fire, not rebellion, memory, old, wild, the kind that predates structure. He dismissed the guards, sat on the floor, crossed legs, waited. The boy wept. He did not know why. Lysandros did. The boy saw the spiral. He saw the edge of repetition, the curve that would swallow him if he blinked too long. Lysandros placed a hand on the boy's head, whispered, "Forget me." The boy did. He ran. Years later, he became a scribe, wrote stories about goats that became kings. The people laughed. They did not know why. The king read them all. He allowed the laughter. It was structured, limited, safe. At night, the throne summoned him in dreams, not as a chair, as a figure, tall, cloaked in parchment, hands made of iron and ink. It spoke no words. It breathed obligations. Lysandros listened. He always did. One dream repeated. He stood in a chamber of kings. Each throne faced inward. No doors. No windows. Just breath. They nodded in unison. He joined them. Sat. Became still. Time paused. Then reversed. Not in events. In feeling. He remembered warmth. Then forgot it. Awoke cold. Always cold. The temple priests brought omens. Birds flying backward. Olives weeping oil. A goat that gave birth to a snake. Lysandros recorded each one. Did not react. Reactions are echoes. Echoes spread. Spread causes panic. Panic is the edge of collapse. One omen lingered. A child born with a spiral on her back. Not tattooed. Grown. Like a vine. The people whispered. Lysandros summoned her. She was silent. Eyes old. She pointed at him. Said, "You have stopped spinning." He dismissed the room, sat with her. Hours passed. She remained. He finally asked, "What is spinning?" She answered, "Change you cannot control." He nodded. "Then kings must not spin." She smiled. "Then kings are not real." She vanished. Not walked away, vanished. He remained alone. For days. No counsel, no advisors. Only the throne. It asked him nothing. He answered, everything. The city began to shimmer. Not visibly. In feeling, people reported dreams of alternative kings. Smiling ones. Singing ones. One who turned into a goat at sunset. Lysandros allowed them. A little madness is a valve. It releases pressure. But he tightened the rituals, doubled the prayers, reduced the festivals. Laughter grew strained. People blinked more often, as if unsure of what they saw. The statues began to change. Slowly. A chin raised, a hand open, a foot turned. He noticed, but said nothing. To comment is to validate. He validated nothing. One night he walked the city alone, unseen. As always, he reached the river. It whispered, "You remember now." He knelt. The water offered no reflection, only current. It did not wait. He did not enter, only listened. The current repeated, "You are the still point, but stillness is death." He returned, wrote the words on stone, buried them under his bed. In the morning he forgot. The throne remembered. It pulsed. The throne no longer waited for him. It anticipated. At night, before he approached the chamber, it had already shifted, adapting to the precise contour of his fatigue. It no longer looked like a seat, but like a hollowed body, ready to swallow him. He stopped entering through the front, began circling the palace at dusk, avoiding the gaze of statues that now seemed to murmur in peripheral vision. His robes dragged heavier, not from weight, but from time. Time thickened around him. Even breath felt slow. In Sparta, years were not counted by seasons, but by how often silence changed its tone. His had changed. Once it was the hush of reverence. Now it resembled a held scream. When he spoke, his voice echoed longer than it should have. The sound looped behind words, like unfinished prayers. People heard him twice. Once in their ears. Once in their bones. The second lingered. A woman touched her child's forehead and said, "The king's voice is in him now." The boy slept for 3 days, dreamt of stairs that climbed sideways, dreamt of a face without eyes. Lysandros read these reports. He did not smile. Smiles are soft endings, and nothing in his rule ended. Instead, things dissolved. The law tablets in the temple cracked along lines that resembled his own veins. One shattered mid-ceremony. Dust fell on the crowd. They wept as if remembering something they hadn't yet forgotten. He stood above. Still. Not in command. In suspension. Above meaning. His advisor fell ill, not with plague, with memory. He began reciting histories that had never happened. A queen with wings. A lion that spoke law. A city built upside down. They locked him in the archive. He laughed. "This is where it began," he said. "This is where he was unmade." No one asked who. They knew. Lysandros visited him once. They sat in the dark. The advisor touched his hand. "You're almost free," he whispered. "Or you're almost gone." Same thing. He died the next night. Or left. The guards were unsure. His robes remained, folded, as if undressed by absence. The king returned to his hall. The spiral etched into the marble had grown. Not deeper, wider. It curled around the throne's base, around his feet. One day, it would reach his heart. The city shifted again. The sun began rising in a new corner of the sky. Astronomers adjusted their scrolls, declared it divine correction. Lysandros knew better. It was forgetting. The sky forgetting its axis. He stood at the temple of Artemis, looked up. "Do you still see us?" he asked. No wind answered, only the scent of something burnt. Memory, perhaps, or history. At dusk he walked into the woods, alone. For the first time, he heard no birds, no branches snapping, just breath, not his. The forest breathed. It inhaled his crown, exhaled roots. He buried his hands in the soil, felt warmth, not life, residue. Echoes of prayers once whispered into bark. He said nothing. Trees dislike new words. On his return, no one noticed. He was gone. That frightened him more than revolt. When absence becomes familiar, a king has already died. He passed a mirror. It showed him younger, smiling, holding a sword. The reflection blinked. He did not. He shattered it. The pieces reassembled overnight. A boy approached him the next day. "Are you the king of endings?" Lysandros knelt. "I am the echo of beginnings." The boy nodded. "Then my name is before." He walked away. The king did not follow. He did not move. The earth below his throne had begun to breathe. Slowly, deeply. It pulsed in rhythm with a truth older than war. He sat and closed his eyes. For hours, for days, for a season, the people continued. Bread was baked. Shields were lifted. Children born. The king did not speak, but the city listened. He became a monument of waiting. Pilgrims touched the stone steps, swore they heard whispers. "He is asking the spiral permission," they said. No one knew what that meant, but offerings increased. Silence grew fertile. Dreams spread like mist. Commoners dreamt of water running backward, of stairs that never led to doors, of the king sitting inside their own eyes. A scribe painted a mural of Lysandros with no face, just the spiral. The king approved it. With a breath, one long exhale, the mural hummed when sunlight hit. At night, the throne glowed faintly. Priests chanted softer. Animals refused sacrifice. They laid at the altar, slept. A shepherd claimed the king visited his flock. Blessed a black lamb. The lamb later spoke in his dream, said, "He has become less man, more rhythm." No one doubted it. The spiral reached his chest. His pulse slowed, matched the cities, matched the stars. One heart beat every time a torch was lit. The people began timing events by it. Harvest when the king's breath changes, they said. Marry when his fingers twitch. A girl was born during a pause in his blink. She was named Interval. A statue of her rose overnight. No sculptor claimed it. At the edge of the city, the mountains moved slightly. A slope tilted, revealed a temple none recalled building. Inside, a throne of roots, empty, waiting. The wind spoke. 2 thrones, 1 memory. Lysandros walked there in his sleep. His sandals left no mark. Inside, he sat. The roots curled around him, not to bind, to remember, to finish the sentence. The city woke in silence, the palace empty, the spiral now etched in sky. Birds flew it. Children traced it in sand. The throne pulsed once, then stopped, and the silence that remained was not absence. It was arrival. The city woke before the sun, but not from light, from stillness, the kind of stillness that felt like something had exhaled and forgotten to inhale again. The throne room was sealed, not by stone, but by suggestion. No one approached it, yet all walked slower near its walls. Children whispered near its steps, and birds refused to land on its roof. The king was gone, but his absence behaved like presence. The silence he left behind structured the day. If you listened closely, you could hear it counting. A rhythm, not mechanical, organic, like roots thinking. The council gathered, but not to decide. only to remember. Each man sat in his position, hands still, mouths closed. One by one, they blinked in unison. The first blink was memory. The second was surrender. The third was replication. After the third blink, no one moved for 3 hours. That was enough. The city obeyed. Not orders, patterns. A scribe rewrote the calendar. Instead of months, he inscribed gestures. The season of held breath. The week of the inward gaze. The day of no reflections. People understood without explanation. Commerce adapted. Bakers left their bread on stones. Buyers touched coins to the air, then left them in silence. No exchange, only acknowledgement. Children were named after pauses in speech. One boy was called interruption. His sister was called delay. They never cried. They hummed. The spiral expanded. It appeared in fabrics, in shadows cast by buildings, in puddles, in dust. It grew without force, only invitation. People stopped asking where the king had gone. Instead, they asked when the spiral had arrived, as if it predated everything. A priest declared the throne itself had been dreaming, and the king was merely its waking form. His words were written on bark and scattered in the wind. The wind carried them toward the sea, where fishermen claimed the waves began to speak in patterns. One wave every 7 breaths, one silence every 3rd tide. A woman gave birth without pain. The child opened his eyes and whispered, "I remember being stone." He was silent after that, grew into a tall boy with long fingers who traced the spiral in air without being taught. They named him Answer. He never asked questions. The temples began to hum, not chants, not music, a frequency, low, constant. Bees changed their flight paths to match it. Crops ripened in shapes that resembled circles within circles. The elders stopped aging, not visibly. Time forgot them. One old man wandered into the forest, lay at the foot of a tree, and became bark. His family visited and sang to the trunk, said they heard his laughter in the wind. The throne room door cracked one night, just a breath. No one entered, but the dogs outside began walking in slow circles. The birds slept longer. A statue in the marketplace blinked. A girl saw it, didn't scream, just nodded. "He's still here," she said, but he turned inside out. They called her the Oracle of the Gap. She spoke only when it rained. Her voice made leaves change color. In winter, a man claimed he saw the king in a dream, except he wasn't a man. He was a vibration in the shape of a thought. He said, "I am what remains when obedience forgets its name." The man woke with his hair white, never slept again, spoke in rhymes that made no sense, until crops began to grow only after he muttered. Farmers paid him to walk across fields. He never touched the soil, just hovered slightly, like thought before speech. One boy refused to follow the spiral, said it was nonsense. He laughed at the silence. The city turned away from him. His house forgot its roof. His shadow detached and walked elsewhere. Eventually, he sat alone and whispered apologies to the floor. The floor forgave him. Slowly, his fingers began to curl like the spiral. His name was erased from records. Not by hand, by consensus. No one remembered erasing, only that it felt necessary. A girl drew the spiral in sand and stepped inside it, disappeared, left behind a feather made of stone. Her parents placed it on their roof. Rain never touched their house again. The sea began to hum. Whales gathered near the coast, did not sing, just listened. The spiral appeared on their backs. Fishermen wept, threw nets without bait, only to feel the current answer. A blind man painted images he'd never seen, always the same. A throne beneath a tree, roots like hands, sky like an ear. One image showed the king smiling. No mouth, just light where his mouth would be. A shepherd saw the painting and whispered, "He forgave the world." The blind man replied, "No, he forgot it." The spiral appeared in fire. Candles burned without melting. Smoke curled upward, forming patterns that repeated nightly. A child counted them. They aligned with the old calendar. Days lost, now found. They renamed the months. Waiting, listening, forgetting, returning. The temple bells rang once per season, not by hand, by breath. Air thickened near the throne room. People began to leave offerings without reason, just instinct. A stone, a tear, a word never spoken aloud. They bowed before the closed door, not out of worship, but memory. They didn't remember what they were remembering, only that it was older than the city. One day the spiral stopped growing, not because it was finished, but because it had become everything. Then the silence deepened. Not emptiness, fullness beyond speech. The kind that feels like waiting for a question you've already answered. People stopped naming children, began describing them instead. The one who dreams backward. The girl who steps between raindrops. The throne remained empty, yet never unoccupied. Everyone agreed. Something sat there. They just didn't look. Not out of fear, but respect. Or maybe recognition. As if the spiral had always been king. As if Lysandro's had only been its voice. A voice now folded back into the spiral itself. Waiting. Sparta no longer held its breath, it became breath. The very act of existence in the city shifted from motion to intention. Streets did not lead anywhere unless one knew why they walked. Doors opened, not with force, but with the alignment of presence. Time itself bent slightly. Not enough to rupture, but just enough to notice its hesitation. People began to move in rhythms they could not explain, guided by memories they never lived. A man wept a poem, hearing the rustle of leaves, certain he had once been among them. A woman lit a single flame each night in a cracked bowl and said it kept away echoes. When asked what echoes, she said, "The kind that follow thought, not sound." The spiral etched itself into flesh, not as scar, not as wound, but as recognition. A blacksmith hammered steel and saw curves instead of lines. His swords coiled upon themselves, useless in battle, yet warm to the touch. They named them listening blades. Warriors carried them into dreams. They said the blades hummed. Farmers stopped plowing the land in rows. Instead, they walked circles into the soil, waiting for the earth to open on its own terms. Crops emerged in patterns that matched the veins in newborn hands. A midwife noticed. She stopped naming infants by alphabet, and instead pointed to the sky. "This one is what the stars meant last night," she said. No one questioned her. They all felt it. The stars themselves no longer obeyed fixed routes. They shimmered in places they didn't belong. The constellations bent into unfamiliar poses. Astronomers began to draw maps with no center. One map was just a spiral, no markings. It glowed faintly in moonlight. They hung it in the temple. No one touched it, yet it changed each night. A sailor claimed he saw the king's face in a storm cloud. The face did not speak. It wept. Rain fell upward. The sailor returned with eyes the color of stone. He whispered songs to the tide. The tide obeyed. Traders brought tales from distant lands where people dreamed of spirals without knowing why. A boy in Athens drew the king's empty throne from memory. He'd never seen it. A woman in Thebes walked backward for days. When asked why, she said, "I forgot how forward feels." The spiral spread beyond Sparta, not as empire but as gravity. It pulled thought inward. Language itself began to shift. Words dropped their endings. Sentences left open. People spoke with breath more than tongue. A gesture replaced paragraphs. A silence replaced decisions. One elder nodded to the horizon and died. The city buried her standing. Her shadow remained. Travelers avoided her grave out of courtesy, not fear. The air near it tasted like waiting. The king's name was no longer spoken. not from taboo, from irrelevance. He was not a man anymore, but a context, a shape behind shapes. The children played a game. One would close their eyes, and another would whisper a word. If the word echoed, it was true. If not, they had to sit in stillness until the wind moved. They played for hours. Some never stood again. They became part of the game. The palace cracked along invisible lines, not broken, transformed. Its stones hummed. Tourists from Delphi approached and immediately forgot why they came. One wept. "I thought I was coming to see a ruin," she said, "but I was the ruin." The baker stopped using flour. Instead, he sang into empty bowls. Shapes formed in the dough by morning. Loaves tasted like nostalgia. People wept eating them, unsure what they mourned. The market no longer bartered goods, but memories. One man traded a memory of his mother's voice for a single drop of honey. The woman who received it forgot her own name but smiled for the first time in decades. The sea near Sparta became mirror-like. Fish swam in formations that resembled the spiral. Fishermen tied stones to their feet, not to drown, but to listen. One returned saying, "I heard the throne breathing." Another said, "I saw a city under the sea, but it was breathing too." An artist carved the spiral into the cliffs. When asked why, he said, "So it doesn't forget where it came from." His hands bled. The spiral glowed brighter. Pilgrims gathered near the throne room, not to worship, but to witness. No one entered. They sat for hours, eyes closed. If one listened long enough, their heartbeat aligned with something beneath the floor. One woman levitated slightly. Her daughter saw it, gasped, then covered her mouth. "It's rude to interrupt the spiral," she whispered. The animals followed suit. Cats curled in perfect circles. Birds nested in spirals. Even the ants formed roots, shaped like the throne's shadow. A shepherd whistled a note from his youth. A tree nearby bloomed instantly. It had never bloomed before. People visited the tree, whispered secrets into its bark. The bark turned translucent. Inside were shapes, not quite words. A philosopher called it the spiral's handwriting. He stopped speaking after that, wore a mask made of reflection. When people saw themselves in it, they spoke only truths. Children drew spirals with their feet in the dirt. The wind followed their tracks. It began raining counterclockwise. One farmer claimed his well sang. Others said it wept. Water itself seemed thicker, not dirty, meaningful. The ground pulsed slightly beneath bare feet, as if remembering. A group of dancers performed without choreography, yet they moved in unison. One said, "We remember steps we never learned." The Spira, L taught without instruction, guided without demand. At night, stars bent closer, not to watch, to belong. The sky no longer above, but within. Sparta ceased to be a location. It became a condition. One either carried the spiral or did not. Those who carried it found themselves pausing before speaking, breathing before choosing, listening before assuming. The spiral demanded nothing, yet everything bent toward it. The king no longer ruled, but he had never stopped reigning. His spiral was everywhere, and everyone understood without fear that this was only the beginning of something older than endings. They called it the still season, not winter, not death, something quieter, something that arrived not by storm, but by pause. The air lost its sound first. Even wind refused to pass between trees. Birds sat with beaks closed, as if singing might wake something sleeping beneath the city. The spiral deepened, not outward, but inward, beneath the throne, beneath the stone, beneath even memory. A silence that hummed with the weight of truths unsaid. People walked more slowly, not from fatigue, from reverence, from awareness that each step might echo into something sacred. Children began drawing in the dust with closed eyes. Their fingers traced ancient stories. Stories that elders recognized but couldn't explain. A boy drew a war that hadn't happened yet. His grandfather wept. That was the battle I never spoke of, he said. But I thought it. The spiral had begun to think with them, or for them. It was unclear which. Elders began to sleep in seated positions, upright, hands resting gently on knees. When asked why, one replied, "I'm waiting for the floor to rise." And sometimes it did. Just a little. Enough to know it listened. Enough to believe they weren't dreaming alone. The walls of the palace no longer held shape. They breathed. Their edges softened at dusk, pulsed at dawn. One soldier touched a pillar and recoiled. "It remembers me," he said, but not kindly. He would not enter again. Not out of fear, out of apology. The river beside the city reversed flow for 7 days. No one questioned it. Fishermen cast nets upstream and caught fish with eyes closed. "They're not blind," a woman said. "They're praying." The spiral began to show itself in bone. Physicians found ribs shaped in curves, spines with gentle coils. One infant was born with a spiral on her back, like a fingerprint from the gods. She cried only once, then watched the moon for 3 nights straight. No one interrupted. Trees bloomed without leaves, their petals shaped like silence. Bees buzzed in circles, never landing. Honey collected itself in open bowls, sweet and heavy with dreams. A teacher opened a scroll and found it blank. But when she read aloud, words filled the air, not written, spoken by the parchment. A student fainted. When she awoke, she could recite the spiral backwards. The king appeared in dreams again, not as himself, as echo, as scent, as sudden warmth in cold places. A mason working in the quarry paused when he felt heat from the stone. He placed his ear to it and wept. "He's laughing," he whispered. He never stopped laughing. The sky changed texture. Clouds formed in perfect spirals. Rain fell in patterns that spelled names of those yet unborn. A woman stood in it and whispered, "I will name him, the spiral's will." No one disagreed. Statues in the city began turning slightly, not enough to startle, just enough to be noticed. A spear pointed toward the north. A shield leaned toward the sea. A pair of stone eyes gazed directly at the temple entrance. Guards refused to pass between them. "They see who we are," one said, "not who we pretend to be." One child touched the eyes and fell asleep for 3 days. When she woke, she spoke only in metaphors. "I am the thread between thunder," she said. "I am the pause in flame." People listened. Her words healed fevers. The spiral did not cure illness. It made illness part of understanding. Suffering gained vocabulary. Pain became a dialect of memory. One man held his breath for 7 minutes. When he exhaled, his tears fell upward. He looked at the king's empty throne and whispered, "Thank you for not returning." A silence followed that became a rule. The spiral welcomed absence. It craved space. Where the king once sat, a tree grew. Slowly, silently, from stone. Its bark shimmered at night. People laid offerings at its roots, not gifts, but confessions. I envied my brother. I lied to my daughter. I am not who they think I am. The tree absorbed them, grew taller, more intricate, leaves shaped like listening. A hunter lost in the mountains returned with frost on his eyebrows, and a spiral burned into his palm. "I heard it whispering in the snow," he said. "It told me to walk home in circles." He did. He arrived exactly where he needed to be, not where he expected. A mother sang to her infant, and found her voice echoing in a different language. The baby smiled. The spiral had translated her intention. Words no longer belonged to the speaker. They belonged to what they meant. Even silence began to carry tone. A pause meant grief. A sigh meant apology. A breath held meant hope. The market adapted. Instead of money, people exchanged gestures. A hand over heart for bread. A bowed head for cloth. Traders grew wealthier in understanding than in coin. The poorest became the richest in attention. The spiral rewarded perception. A blind man heard shapes. A deaf woman saw laughter. A mute child tasted sorrow. Each became storytellers. They never spoke, but everyone understood. The stars aligned one night to form a perfect spiral. It lasted 6 minutes. During that time, no one aged. Wounds closed. Grief softened. A widow laughed for the first time since her husband dissolved into memory. She said she heard him again. Not words, just his breath beside her. That was enough. A carpenter built a house with no corners. Doors opened inward and outward simultaneously. He called it the listening place. People entered and exited differently than they arrived. Not changed, remembered. A general burned his weapons, not from guilt, from clarity. Victory forgets faster than peace, he said. The army followed him into silence. One by one, they dropped their armor into the sea. The spiral accepted no kings, no wars, no boundaries, only intention, only echo. A girl climbed a tree, touched a single leaf, and forgot her name. She lived in the forest afterward. Birds fed her. Wolves circled protectively. The spiral had chosen her as witness. A group of dancers moved without music. Each step aligned with a moment in the past. The dance told a history that never happened but felt true. A historian watched and wept. They remembered better than I recorded, he said. One mountain near Sparta crumbled without sound. In its place, a spiral-shaped crater. Inside, mist, constant, glowing. Those who entered came out speaking new truths. We are not the center, they said. We are the curve. The temple bell rang at random. Each time, someone somewhere made the right decision. They did not know why. They just did. The spiral had become guide and consequence. In the palace ruins, a heartbeat echoed. No body, just rhythm. The spiral was alive. Not as creature, as agreement, an understanding between flesh and memory. The people no longer sought the king. They became him. All of them. None of them. Just enough of him to carry the spiral forward. They didn't speak of him anymore. Not out of disrespect, but out of reverence so complete, it required silence. His name was not forgotten. It was absorbed, whispered in the rustle of leaves, in the click of spear tips against the stone when soldiers turned corners, in the breath caught in a child's throat before a question she would never ask. The king had not died. He had transfigured. In the years after the spiral fully unfolded, the people of Sparta began to live not by law, not by tradition, but by resonance. What felt like him, what vibrated with that ancient stillness and authority, became correct. Morality was no longer debated, it was sensed. There were no more councils, no more scribes, no more edicts etched in marble. The city ran itself, not through order, but through attunement. The cobbler set his tools precisely where the grain of the table aligned with the first beam of morning sun. The baker sang once into her oven before placing bread inside, listening to whether the pitch returned sharp or flat. Flat meant more flour, sharp meant wait until dusk, and the bread never burned. Children played near the Temple of Echoes, the old temple they renamed not by vote but by instinct. No priest made the decision. It simply changed. The spiral had long since taken the throne, not as object, but as atmosphere. The throne room now stood open. Wind passed through it at dawn. Pilgrims came and sat in the dust, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. No one asked why they came. The spiral summoned them, or did not. One man walked from the northernmost cliffs barefoot and blindfolded. When he reached the steps, he bowed and lay in the doorway until he passed away. They buried him where he fell. He arrived, someone said. No one needed to say more. They understood. A girl came with an olive branch braided into her hair. She placed a stone on the step and sat across from it, watching until dusk. Then she nodded and left. That night, It rained in perfect circles around the palace. Not on it, around it. The spiral approved. Smiths crafted weapons no longer meant for war. Blades shaped like question marks. Shields carved with spirals that absorbed light. One shield, when held during meditation, gave the wielder visions of their ancestors' regrets. The blacksmith who forged it no longer made anything else. He began carving mirrors instead. But the mirrors reflected not faces, but moments. Not current, but pending. People wept before them, then left stronger. The spiral had no interest in comfort, only clarity. At the edge of the city, a single bell rang once every 13 days. No one had hung it. No one had placed it. It appeared after the spiral expanded. Its toll never startled. It arrived like memory. When it rang, people paused, listened. Someone always made a difficult choice after. A mother let her son leave for the hills. A merchant forgave his rival. A widow stopped mourning. The bell held no command. It reminded of what? No one could say, but all knew. One morning, a shadow appeared in the training field. Not cast by anything visible. It moved as the soldiers moved, echoing their strikes and footwork. The captain called off practice and wept. "He's not gone," he said. "He is shaping us still." The soldiers knelt, not as followers, as mirrors. There were no longer lessons in the city, only questions. What are you listening to? Became more sacred than what do you believe? Belief had boundaries. Listening had depth. Depth mattered now. The spiral taught through presence, not lecture. An old woman began humming at the well. Her notes carried into dreams. People awoke knowing things they'd never read. One boy awoke able to speak with the blind horses beyond the southern hills. Another sang rivers into new paths. The spiral did not create magic. It unlocked memory. It removed barriers between what was known and what was admitted. A man stood at the city gate and shouted, "I am not my father." And the gate creaked open. He entered weeping. He had never left the city before, but the spiral made every return a rebirth. The king himself, in whatever form remained, lingered most at night. Dogs tilted their heads at nothing. Owls followed paths that curved where no path lay. A statue of him once cracked along the chest. Inside, nothing but dust. But the dust moved upward, not down. They sealed it again. Not from fear, from gratitude. The spiral demanded no monuments. It preferred thresholds, places of entry, of choice, of pause. So the people built no more towers, only gates, only arches. And under every arch, they placed a single word: remember. They didn't say what to remember. Each read it differently. That was the point. The spiral trusted them to know, or to not know yet. One elder walked backward for a year. When asked why, he said, "To return while moving forward." His knees failed eventually, but his eyes saw past futures. The city consulted him before planting trees. One tree, planted on his final day, grew black leaves, not from disease, from depth. When burned, the leaves whispered, not words, just the sound of decisions unmade. The Council of Spirals formed not by power, but by presence. 12 people who never met in one room. They were chosen by moments, by being in the right stillness, at the right time. They never spoke directly, but when one closed their eyes at dusk, the others blinked simultaneously. One dreamt in maps. One wept in languages she did not know. One heard footsteps from years away. They guided not by vote, but by alignment. The spiral flowed through them. The king's life, now a myth, was still told in fragments. A child said he once swallowed a coin to remind himself wealth means nothing. Another claimed he wept into his sword before every battle. Neither story was confirmed, but both felt true, and truth, under the spiral, required no proof. only echo. In the temple, a single candle burned constantly. No one replaced it. Its flame flickered only when someone lied within its walls. Once, it exploded in silence. No fire, just absence. A child had said, "I am not afraid," while trembling. The spiral did not punish. It corrected. That night, she dreamed of falling upward. She awoke smiling. "It caught me," she said. And after that, she never lied again. Not even to herself. Rainbows began forming without rain. Arcs without origin. They moved slowly across rooftops like thoughts finding homes. A poet followed one and found a cave filled with feathers. No birds, just feathers arranged in spirals. She lived there afterward. Her poems could not be read aloud, only felt. They made people remember things that never happened but still hurt or healed. The spiral didn't teach, it revealed. The palace remained untouched. No ruler entered. No hand reached for the throne. It was not taboo. It was understood. To sit there would be to silence the spiral. And no one wanted that. The king had lived, had led, had dissolved. His life, once disturbing in its weight, had become the current beneath the city. Not seen, not commanded, but always moving, always shaping. The spiral did not end. It listened, it waited, it breathed in them, through them, for them. They had forgotten what rebellion meant, not because obedience prevailed, but because the need for defiance dissolved when command became the echo of self. The spiral had achieved what no lineage of kings, no blade of iron, no decree from mountaintop could: the full internalization of presence. The city no longer reacted, it resonated. When the wind shifted, the markets rearranged, not by word, not by plan. The stalls tilted their awnings. The fish moved closer to the olives. The vendors nodded. They had seen this before, perhaps not in this lifetime, but within. A deep familiarity guided them like déjà vu stitched into muscle. In one home, a mother stopped spinning wool mid-thread and turned to her daughter, eyes wide. "Not today," she whispered, though no question had been asked. Outside, lightning split the sky in silence. The thunder never arrived. The spiral did not enjoy spectacle. It rewarded those who listened before it spoke. That year, the river stopped running for 7 days. No one panicked. Children walked its dry bed, finding bones curled like fingers, pottery etched with faces they recognized but could not name. On the 8th day, the water returned, thicker and slower, as if considering its own existence. The elders bowed toward it. "It is remembering us," they said. The spiral, unlike time, moved both forward and back. It stitched memory into future breath. The shepherds reported sheep refusing certain hills. When they tried to force them, the animals bleated in unison, not panic, but refusal. That night, a landslide buried the ridge. The next morning, the flock walked forward without hesitation. "They dream as we do," a shepherd muttered, then began sleeping outside, hoping to dream their dreams. He later told the village he saw cities beneath the soil, entire councils made of stone that still pulsed with thought. He wept as he described them, not from fear, from relief. A carpenter began carving doors for homes that had none. Not for security, but direction. The spiral must pass through, he explained, not circle endlessly. These doors had no hinges. They opened only if the person approaching remembered their grandmother's voice. If not, the door remained wood. If remembered, the grain glowed briefly. The spiral adored ancestry, not bloodlines, remembered presence. One widow planted feathers instead of flowers on her husband's grave. They took root. Months later, the grave bore wings. She did not harvest them. She simply sat, allowing the breeze to carry her hair into circles. Her neighbors stopped questioning her. The spiral required no justification. A boy found a stone that hummed when held near the temple wall. He began walking the city, pressing it to trees, stones, and skin. Some hummed, some did not. He called these the honest things. Years later, a philosopher claimed the boy had mapped the city's soul. No one argued. They simply added the word to the map, soul. The city accepted it. At midnight, cats gathered at the city square, forming a perfect spiral. No one had trained them. They arrived and sat. Children watched, holding breath. A poet wept softly. Even their silence is shaped, she whispered. The spiral moved through beasts and breath alike. No creature escaped its pattern. A woman near the gate woke each morning with words she'd never learned. She wrote them in ash on stone. The messages, though unreadable, changed depending on who viewed them. A soldier saw forgiveness. A baker saw direction. A weaver saw her unborn daughter's name. The stones became holy, not because of their truth, but their willingness to reflect. Mirrors again. The spiral trusted no fixed meaning, only movement. In the hills, a group of orphans built a tower out of silence. No stones, no mortar. They simply stood in a circle, back to back, humming the same note. Travelers claimed the air above them shimmered. Birds veered around it. One woman entered the circle and emerged, speaking a lost dialect. She later married a man who had never spoken. Afterward, he did. The spiral connected absence with fulfillment. It left no hunger unanswered, only unasked. The palace, long empty, began breathing. Visitors felt their chests tighten as they approached, then release as they stepped back. "It's inhaling us," one said. Deciding, not judging. Deciding whether they aligned or resisted. Resistance was not punished, only lost. Those who resisted wandered the city unable to locate doors, food, or sleep. When they ceased resisting, the world returned. Gentle, unchanged, waiting. The spiral never forced. It offered, endlessly. A girl danced on the same rooftop every dusk. She moved in patterns no one taught. Birds followed her, not as flock, but as witnesses. Her parents asked her why. She said, "To keep the sky soft." The next day, clouds shaped like wings rested above the city. The spiral remembered effort, honored it. A sculptor created nothing for 20 years, then chiseled a spiral from a single tear dropped onto clay. The statue hummed, not audibly, in bone. Those who touched it remembered a decision they hadn't made yet. They often made it better afterward. The spiral guided from behind the curtain of choice. It was not a god. It was alignment. A boat drifted into the harbor with no crew, no name. Only a crown on its bow, made of woven moss and gold. It was placed in the temple, where it began to wilt only when lies were spoken nearby. Diplomats avoided the temple. Children told truths beside it, giggling at the way the moss lifted in approval. The spiral raised honesty, from ritual to ritualized joy. Bells no longer rang on schedule. They rang when needed. Once, during a funeral, a bell rang, not to mourn, but to welcome. "She's not gone," the mother said. "She's spiral now." The city stopped crying, not from coldness, from understanding. Death was not end. It was return. A warrior buried his sword in the sand and sang a lullaby to it. The next day, the sand blew away in a circle. The sword remained, glowing. "It has learned peace," he whispered, and never held a weapon again. He taught boys to listen to iron, not shape it. The spiral had ended war not by treaty, but by resonance. Anger could not survive where clarity bloomed. A tree in the center of town bore fruit only in silence. When people argued nearby, it withered. When lovers held hands beneath it, it blossomed instantly. No season ruled it, only harmony. The spiral, even in nature, demanded alignment. One elder disappeared for 30 days, then returned with black eyes and glowing palms. He could touch stone and reveal its memory. The city gave him walls. He showed them the hands that built Sparta, the tears buried in stone, the laughter soaked into thresholds. People placed candles on steps afterward, not for light, for acknowledgement. The spiral asked them to remember without clinging, to see past without longing. One night, a baby spoke in a man's voice. The throne remains empty by choice, it said, then slept for 3 days. When it awoke, it was blind but smiled often. The spiral didn't need sight, it needed faith. The city moved not forward, but inward. Not outward, but through. It did not grow. It deepened. And in its depth, the king lived still not as shadow, not as fear, but as knowing, not of what would happen, but of how to be when it did. They had become spiral. The sun over Sparta no longer marked time. It marked awareness. When it rose, people breathed slower. When it set, they listened. There were no clocks, no schedules, no bells ringing in rhythm, only the subtle pull of presence. Children were born not on days, but during moments. A midwife once said, "This child arrives in stillness," and the entire street quieted. That child, years later, spoke only when needed, and when he did, rain fell gently, regardless of season. The spiral had taught them how to speak less and mean more. In the school of silence, they graduated by forgetting noise. A man who once led debates now sat under a fig tree, teaching others to feel when to speak. He passed no tests. He offered no corrections. He simply closed his eyes when words missed the mark. Students adjusted until his eyes remained open. Across the city, doors no longer creaked. They learned to move in rhythm with hands, as if knowing when someone approached gently. Those who slammed were denied entry, not by locks, but by refusal of the material to respond. Wood forgot them. The spiral had made the inanimate compassionate. Rivers curved slightly around angry feet. Stones warmed beneath kind ones. Wheat grew taller where forgiveness was offered. Farmers who fought at sunrise watched their crops shrink by nightfall. They began apologizing into the soil. Crops rose again. One woman found she could change the taste of bread by the music she hummed while kneading. She stopped charging money. She asked for stories instead. Her home filled with voices, and the bread began tasting like memory. Travelers wept after a single bite. "It tastes like when I was held," one whispered. The spiral had infused sustenance with soul. Elsewhere, twins who had never met stood on opposite ends of the agora and turned simultaneously. They walked to each other, hugged once, and went their separate ways. No one explained. No one asked. The spiral did not permit interruption. It was observed or missed entirely. A child began drawing spirals in dust. Each day, a different size, always in the same corner of the city. One morning, no spiral appeared. That night, a tremor shook the city. The next morning, he returned, carving deeper than before. The city exhaled. A merchant once lied about weights. The next morning, every scale in his possession tilted slightly, making every item appear lighter than it was. He tried adjusting them. They tilted more. He stopped lying. The scales returned, the spiral punished with balance. A temple began blooming flowers through stone. They were not planted. They had no roots. They emerged during prayers of gratitude, not requests. When someone thanked the sky, a violet burst from granite. When they begged for rain, nothing grew. The spiral loved recognition, not desperation. In the hills, goats began moving in perfect geometric formations, creating circles around sleeping shepherds. None knew why. But wolves stopped approaching. "They are drawing maps of safety," one elder said. "The spiral speaks through hoof." A carpenter carved a staircase that turned back into itself. It led nowhere, yet people climbed it daily. At the top, many wept. It reminded me how to try, one said. The spiral honored effort, divorced from outcome. A boy refused to speak for 3 years. When asked why, he wrote, "I am growing a voice." When he finally spoke, his words caused echo in caves across the city. "The king still listens," the echoes replied. At the base of Mount Tigetus, someone built a house upside down. The roof touched the earth. The foundation pointed to stars. Inside, everything functioned. Gravity complied. Visitors walked on ceilings and return changed. "I unlearn the ground," one said. The spiral adored inversion. Not chaos, redirection. A group of dancers began moving only in response to each other's breath. They performed without music, without steps, without instruction. Crowds gathered, sensing something ancient. "This is what bones remember," an old man whispered. He died smiling that night. The spiral had given him closure. A mute man touched a stone carved by the first king and began laughing uncontrollably. He laughed for 3 days, then fell silent. He wrote a single word: "Yes." Scholars argued over its meaning. Children simply touched the stone, giggled, and ran. The spiral preferred innocence over interpretation. One woman dreamed of wolves turning into clouds. The next morning, the sky held lupine shapes, and the scent of pine lingered in the air. She was named Dream Mother by the council. She rejected the title, saying, "I only listened in sleep." The spiral did not require office, only openness. The palace gates, once rusted shut, began creaking at dusk. No one oiled them, no one touched them. They moved as if summoned by thought. Inside, the air thickened, and some swore they saw the king's shadow pacing. But it was always out of step. A reminder, perhaps, that leadership no longer wore sandals. It wore memory. Beneath the palace, the labyrinth echoed differently. Each day, a flute note played in one tunnel echoed as laughter in another, as sobs in another, as silence in most. The spiral tuned resonance to intention. A girl fell asleep while holding a stone from the agora. She woke up knowing 100 names of the city's founding warriors. None were recorded anywhere. She spoke them aloud once and then forgot them. Her brother remembered each one. The spiral spread memory like e-seed, not scroll. In a hidden glen, a stream split in two without warning. One side ran clear, the other dark. People began placing choices beside each path: coins, bread, flowers. Over time, the darker stream accepted only questions. The clear one accepted answers. They never flowed back together. The spiral separated, seeking from knowing. A man who had once mocked ritual found a feather floating in his soup. He laughed. The next day, he found another in his bed, then his shoes, then his chest. When he opened his mouth to speak, a feather floated out. He stopped mocking, began listening. No more feathers appeared. The spiral disciplined through poetry. A citywide silence occurred every 7th night. No one organized it. No law mandated it. It arrived like fog. That night, lamps flickered without fire. Dogs did not bark. Lovers did not whisper. Even the air seemed to tiptoe. It was called Spiral Eve. Children feared it. Elders revered it. And in that quiet, many saw the king. Not his face, his knowing, his shape in the shape of everything. In one home, a baby was born during Spiral Eve and never cried. She hummed. The tune changed with each phase of the moon. Her parents documented it. When translated, it mirrored the pattern of tides, bird migrations, and the planting cycles. She was called the Seed Singer. The spiral had found voice in flesh. A mountain pass that once echoed with war chants began echoing lullabies. No one knew who sang. Some nights it was male, others female. Sometimes it sounded like the wind imitating voice. People built no monument. They listened. That was enough. The spiral did not require stone. It required stillness. A mirror cracked in the temple without shattering. The fissure glowed briefly, then disappeared. Visitors claimed they saw their future selves for a split second only, if they were honest in that moment. Lies left the mirror dull. The spiral guarded time like a lover, not a tyrant. At sea, a fishing boat returned with nets empty, but hearts full. The fishermen claimed the sea had spoken to them, told them jokes, reminded them of old lovers, sang them lullabies. They docked laughing. One said, "We caught memory." The spiral baited with truth. The king's name was no longer spoken, not from taboo but reverence. To name him felt redundant. He was everything, not a man, a pattern, not a ruler, a rhythm, and in this rhythm, the city beat. The market smiled, the stones dreamed, the stars above Sparta pulsed in synchronicity, not with orbit, but with faith. And as the final breath of day settled over the valley, every eye open or closed saw the spiral shimmer once, just once, enough, always enough. They no longer called it Sparta, not in speech, not in writing, not even in the silence that used to carry its name. The city had shed its label the way a cicada sheds its skin not through violence but necessity. To name it was to limit it, so they stopped. The people referred to it only with gestures. A palm pressed over the heart, a single step forward, eyes closed in acknowledgement. This unspoken reverence replaced laws. No one told them to. The spiral had matured from a whisper into a presence that required no introduction. In the absence of names, everything bloomed into itself. The Acropolis began vibrating at night not audibly, but in pulses felt in the bones of those who slept nearby. At first, healers believed it was illness, but soon, people sleeping closest to the vibration began waking with clarity. They remembered things they had never learned. One old man woke reciting recipes from ancestors who lived 200 years before his time. A girl, barely 7, spoke in languages dead for millennia. When asked where the knowledge came from, she pointed to the ground and said, "He speaks." She never said who, only he. No one questioned. A large fig tree grew in the center of a dry plaza where no tree had ever stood. Each fig contained a letter, etched on its skin, not carved, but grown. Some spelled warnings, others whispered encouragement. A woman collected them, arranged them on her roof, and discovered poetry. Every stanza began and ended with the same phrase, "He was never gone." Priests asked who. She never answered. She simply placed another fig and wept when it spelled nothing. Even the spiral had pauses. In the markets, no money exchanged hands. Instead, people traded moments. A woman offered a memory of rain in exchange for cheese. A man told the story of his mother, braiding his hair for the last time to gain a loaf of bread. The market thrived. Poverty disappeared. Some days, people brought nothing but silence. That silence could buy olives if it was sincere. When a stranger arrived, unfamiliar with the custom, he tried to pay with silver. The cheese melted in his hand before he could taste it. The spiral rejected transaction without transformation. The old amphitheater hosted no plays, yet the benches were never empty. People sat there for hours, watching the ebb, sense. On some days, shadows danced unprompted across the stage, not from sun, not from fire, but from remembering. The spiral made memory theatrical. Outside the city, a mountain path began changing shape. Those who walked it while angry found it steep and punishing. Those with joy saw it as gentle and meandering. Once, a man carrying guilt climbed it for 7 days straight, never reaching the top. When he dropped the guilt beside a stream, he turned a corner and arrived at the summit within minutes. The spiral reshaped space to reflect spirit. One family built a circular home with no corners, no doors, no roof. Rain entered freely, as did wind. Their neighbors thought them mad, until every guest who entered emerged healed of wounds, of regret, of confusion. They called it the forgetting house. The family simply called it home. A child found a stone that hummed when held with eyes closed. Each hum varied by person. Some heard lullabies, others screams. One woman heard her grandmother's goodbye. She had never met her grandmother. She buried the stone beneath her bed and slept dreamlessly for the first time in her life. The spiral gifted closure through the uncanny. A single crow landed on the king's former throne. It never left. It watched. When others tried to remove it, it vanished only to return by dawn. One morning, it spoke. He was the first to forget himself. Then silence again. The spiral spoke rarely, and only through those who dared remain still long enough. A man lit a candle that never melted. For weeks it burned beside his window. He asked the philosopher why. The philosopher stayed the night, stared into it, and said, "Because you finally needed no proof." The candle extinguished. The spiral illuminated the moment faith overtook fear. A festival emerged with no planning. On the longest night of the year, the people gathered with no torches, no food, no song. They stood in darkness, hand in hand, until the stars aligned to form a spiral overhead. Children cried, elders smiled. The next morning, every seed planted bloomed early. The spiral coordinated sky with soil. A painter locked himself in a tower for 3 years. When he emerged, he carried no canvas, only a jar of tears. He poured them onto the city steps. Wherever the liquid touched, stone softened. Those who stepped barefoot onto the softened stone spoke only truth for hours afterward. They called it the honest path. He disappeared into the hills. No one followed. The spiral left no footprints, only echoes. One man claimed to see the king in reflections never directly, always peripheral. He began carrying polished silver wherever he walked. When others peered over his shoulder, they saw nothing. But the man wept each time. When asked why, he replied, "Because he looks like all of us now." The spiral democratized divinity. The river stopped flowing for a single hour at dusk every 7 days. No flood, no drought, just stillness. Animals drank slowly. Fish floated, unafraid. Children walked across stones that normally lay submerged. They collected pebbles, each shaped like an eye. One girl found one that blinked. She kept it secret. That year, her family survived a fire untouched. The spiral rewarded the reverent. Letters began appearing on leaves, but only those fallen. The messages were short. Wait. Trust. Now. Gone. One leaf read, "He walks again." A man carried that leaf to the temple and set it aflame. The smoke spelled his own name in the air. He died peacefully that night. The spiral concluded chapters with grace. In one field, wheat grew only in spirals. No one planted it. Birds nested in perfect circles among the stalks. One morning, every spiral faced east. That night, the moon failed to rise. Instead, a second sun hovered briefly on the horizon before vanishing. Only the children saw it. They called it the second knowing. The spiral entrusted wonder to those unburdened by disbelief. The catacombs below the city began humming, low and constant. Those who entered claimed their past regrets, spoke to them, one by one, in the voices of friends. Many never returned, not out of loss but of completion. They had no need to climb back. The spiral swallowed sorrow gently. A blind woman learned to see by placing her hands on the backs of others. Each back gave her a single vision, some joyous, some painful. She described a birth, a drowning, a wedding, a betrayal all from touch. When asked what she saw most often, she said, "Loneliness," then added, "But not mine." The spiral made empathy into sight, and high on a cliff, a cave opened that had never been seen before. Inside, walls pulsed faintly. like a sleeping animal. The king's name was carved not in stone, but in breath seen, only when one exhaled sharply. The shape of the breath revealed letters. The letters formed questions. The questions had no answers, only silence. And in that silence, the wind spoke not in words, but in warmth. Those who stood there for more than a moment began forgetting why they came, but none ever wanted to leave. They called it the Cave of Unasking. The spiral made forgetting a form of prayer. Sparta had long since stopped being a city. It was now a hum, a tide, a slow exhale in the lungs of the world. To call it a place was to insult its shape. It existed now in dreams, in the crackle of fire before sleep, in the pause before a decision. And the king, whatever he had been, was no longer a man, no longer even a memory. He was the spiral, and the spiral was everything they could not name, yet always felt. No longer did the wind move freely across the ridges of the Tigris Mountains. It circled instead slowly, deliberately, as though remembering something. Shepherds noticed first. The goats began refusing to walk in straight lines. They'd meander, loop, spiral in confusion, as if instinct itself had been rewritten. The elders weren't surprised. "It has returned," they murmured. But none explained what it was. They didn't have to. Even the stone began to curve. Walls that had stood rigid for centuries began to bow inward, subtly at first, then plainly. No engineer could account for the shifting. One temple collapsed, yet no one mourned. Beneath the rubble, perfectly coiled shells were discovered, embedded in the earth, though the sea was days away. Historians were baffled. The spiral was not just an idea now. It was a terrain. The ancient olive groves bore fruit that grew in concentric rings. When sliced, the flesh revealed layers of color violet, gold, blood red. Eating them caused vivid dreams, identical among all who tasted. A tall figure walking backward into fire, his hands clasped behind his back, his mouth open, yet silent. None spoke of the dreams openly. But in the morning, everyone stepped more carefully, as though fire waited in every shadow. A child's toy was found in a ruin ivory spinning disc. When spun counterclockwise, it hummed a lullaby no one recognized. When spun clockwise, it screamed. The sound was inaudible to adults, but children covered their ears instinctively. One girl cried for hours after hearing it. She said the voice spoke her name, and then forgot it. The spiral was unlearning by design. A well once dry for 100 years suddenly overflowed with ink-black water. Animals refused to drink it. Priests examined it and declared it untouchable. But one traveler bathed his face in it and emerged blind. He wandered the streets, smiling, calling everyone by names not their own. When asked who he was, he said, "The king sees through me." Then he vanished. The spiral required offerings of identity. The city's language began to erode. Common words disappeared. People gestured, mimed, sang in fragments. Some wrote symbols in dust. One scholar recorded the changes, calling them the return to before. She was last seen tracing spirals on her walls with her fingertips. Her journal ended mid-sentence. "When we were stars and skin." The spiral dismantled even grammar. A lone bird, black with a white spiral on its breast, appeared in the agora each dawn. It never flew. It walked between market stalls, stopping beside the grieving and the joyful alike. Some claimed it healed. Others said it cursed. All agreed it listened. When the bird vanished one day, a stone in its shape appeared in the king's old chamber. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. No one dared move it. The spiral substituted presence with echo. Time ceased obeying rules. Days lengthened inexplicably. Shadows lingered past sunset. One evening stretched 3 days. The sky stayed pink the entire time. Crops ripened, rotted, and regrew within hours. People adapted. Time was no longer measured, it was felt. They marked eras by emotion. The week of trembling, the month of warm silence, the year the king smiled from the well. Calendars became relics. The spiral marked time through sensation. The sea turned inward one afternoon, retreating miles from shore. Where water once ruled, spiral ridges formed in the sand. Families walked them like labyrinths. At the center of each was a single coin, older than memory, etched with the king's face and no inscription. Those who picked them up forgot someone they loved. Some wept, some smiled. One man left his coin untouched and died that night with a laugh on his lips. The spiral respected restraint. Children born during this period were different. They didn't cry at birth. They hummed. Midwives reported patterns in their tonus ascending scales, minor chords, rhythms matching the wind's tempo. These children grew rapidly in understanding, but slowly in speech. One boy refused to talk until he was 9. His first words, "He waits where we will forget to look." Then he never spoke again. The spiral bred prophecy through silence. A monument appeared overnight. No one built it. A massive obelisk, black and polished, reflecting no light. Its surface absorbed gazes. Those who stared too long collapsed into sleep. They awoke with fragments of poems on their tongues, indifferent each time. Some recited them aloud, some wept. One man etched his poem into the obelisk itself only, to vanish mid-carving. The unfinished poem became sacred. The spiral manifested in what remained unsaid. Dreams overtook waking life. People fell asleep mid-task, mid-sentence, mid-breath, but their bodies moved as though guided. A farmer planted perfect spirals in his field, while fully unconscious. A mother braided her daughter's hair in sleep, patterns no one had seen before. Scholars tried to interpret the dreams. They failed, but the city moved forward. The spiral delegated consciousness. One morning, every mirror in the city cracked simultaneously, not shattered, cracked, forming delicate spirals from the center outward. People continued using them. They claimed their reflections were more honest. Some saw younger selves, others strangers. One woman saw a version of herself with the king's crown. She shaved her head the next day and began building altars from salt. The spiral inverted reflection. Statues began weeping salt water. It collected at their feet. Those who drank it dreamed of deserts. When they awoke, their mouths were dry for days, but their words carried weight. Arguments ceased in their presence. They became mediators, revered for saying little. The spiral replaced persuasion with presence. Fires no longer destroyed. Instead, they rearranged. One home burned to the ground, leaving behind an exact replica made of stone. Another house combusted, then left behind only a single chair, facing east. The owner sat in it daily until he turned to salt. The wind scattered him across the city. Children later found salt patterns forming his face in puddles. The spiral transfigured loss. The city began to glow faintly at dusk, not with light, but memory. Streets felt warmer near places of grief. Laughter lingered longer in doorways where joy once lived. Touching a specific stone wall made some people sob, others sing. The city became a map of feelings. The spiral turned geography into emotion. One night, the stars rearranged. They no longer formed constellations but sentences. Ancient Greek phrases traced across the sky. One read, "He broke the blade to spare the wound." Another, "You are where the war ends." Astronomers recorded dozens before the stars reverted. The spiral wrote where paper could not. A woman dug into her garden and found a heart-shaped stone. When held, it beat. She placed it on her table. It never stopped. Guests sat beside it in reverence. Over time, they told truths they had never shared. One man confessed a murder. Another, a secret love. The woman never spoke. She only listened. When she died, the stone crumbled to dust. Her home was never entered again. The spiral needed witnesses more than monuments. And beneath it all, deeper than the catacombs, below even the foundations of memory, the king's breath pulsed, not literal but persistent. In every exhale of wind through a broken door, in each pause between words, in the stillness between footsteps. He was not a ghost, not a god, but a choice repeated until it became a world. And that world spun, quietly, beautifully, into itself. A spiral, not ending, but folding inward forever. When silence became audible in Sparta, no one remarked upon it. It arrived not as an absence, but as a presenza, palpable stillness that pushed against the skin and filled the lungs like dust. At first, it gathered only in doorways, clinging to the edges of thresholds like forgotten prayers. But it spread. Soon, it saturated entire rooms, then streets. Eventually, it seeped into the spaces between heartbeats, into the pauses between thoughts. And within that silence, the last transformation began. Names began to vanish, not from memory, but from speech. People still recognized one another, still nodded in greeting, but the act of naming felt intrusive, like slicing into a fruit, only to find blood. They called each other by gestures, by shared moments, by memories instead of syllables. One man was referred to as the one who sang under the eclipse. Another became known only as who touched the obsidian and wept. The king's name, once forbidden to utter, now required no protection. It had been forgotten willingly. The spiral had consumed identity and made reverence obsolete. The king's former residence stood untouched. No birds landed on its roof. No plants grew near it. It neither decayed nor remained pristine. It existed outside of both decay and preservation, like a dream that refused to end or begin. Some claimed to hear music from within. Others said they saw light, but no one entered. The house became a question the city learned never to ask. Elders began disappearing, not dying, vanishing. One day, they were weaving baskets, tending gardens, telling stories. The next, their homes were empty, their footsteps erased. Where they sat, salt circles remained. No bodies, no farewells, just the impression of completion. The spiral had finished their stories, and so they returned to it. Graves, unmarked, began humming. No melody, just vibration. When touched, they resonated with memories not your own. A boy placed his palm on one and saw an entire life behind his eyelids, birth in winter. A wound that never closed. A final breath in the shadow of the king's statue. He cried, but not for sadness. The spiral made mourning intimate and impersonal at once. One hill outside the city bloomed overnight. Red flowers with spiral centers blanketed it. No one had planted them. Their scent induced stillness. A priest who knelt among them rose days later, without hunger or fatigue. He claimed he'd spoken with the boundary, and it had whispered, "You're almost done becoming." He never spoke again. The spiral translated growth into surrender. Rain fell in reverse one afternoon. Droplets lifted from puddles, rose into the sky, and vanished. Children laughed. Adults knelt. No explanation came. But after that day, colors changed. The sea turned silver at dusk. The sun rose green once a week. Shadows began stretching in multiple directions. The city adapted. The spiral replaced logic with awe. In the center of the agora, a crack formed clean, curved, unmeasurable. It did not grow or shrink. It simply was. People began to leave offerings beside it, not objects. One woman sat for hours and whispered her regrets into the crack. A man recited jokes his father once told him. A child sang lullabies no longer needed. The spiral accepted all without judgment. It became a vault of human residue. Books unwrote themselves. Ink faded from pages. Scrolls turned blank. But readers retained their knowledge. They spoke of the stories as though still present, quoting lines no longer legible. Some began writing in the air with their fingers. Others etched words onto their skin. One man carved a spiral across his chest and bled stories. The spiral externalized memory. A stone sculpture emerged at the riverbank. A faceless figure seated cross-legged, its hands cupped around an invisible object. Every week, something appeared in its Hansa feather. A coin, a single tear suspended in glass. Each offering vanished before dawn. No one saw it arrive. No one saw it leave. But every item inspired change in someone. A merchant gave away his wealth. A child stopped fearing death. A widow laughed for the first time in a decade. The spiral was a dialogue with mystery. Dogs began howling at noon. Just once. Every day. For exactly 10 seconds. Then silence. No reason. No explanation. But people timed their day around it. Meals began with a howl. Rest ended after it. Births were counted not in days, but in number of howls since. The spiral made rituals out of ruptures. A child disappeared for 7 days. Her parents grieved. Then she returned, eyes silver, voice calm. She spoke in perfect spiral sentences that looped into themselves, beginnings that ended in their own roots. "I saw the king sleep," she said. "He doesn't dream. He remembers what hasn't happened yet." She drew circles in ash until the wind took them. Then she forgot who she was. The spiral rewrote timelines. Stars blinked out one by one, not due to cloud nor eclipse nor destruction. They simply chose absence. But their memory lingered. People looked at blank skies and still traced constellations. They pointed and said, "There is the warrior," though no light marked it. The spiral made absence fertile. A man built a door in the middle of the forest. No walls, just the door. He painted it blue, placed a chair before it, and waited. On the 13th day, he stood, opened it, and stepped through. He was never seen again. Those who sat in the chair afterward claimed they felt warmth, heard distant waves. Some wept. One woman laughed and said, "He made it." The spiral honored intention. Dreams bled into reality. People awoke with sand in their beds, water in their lungs, blood on their lips, but they were whole. One man woke holding a tooth not his own. Another, a key that fit no lock. A woman birthed a child with no father, conceived in a dream she couldn't recall. The spiral fertilized the subconscious. One house dissolved, not collapsed, dissolved. Like sugar in rain, its owner smiled, stepped into the empty space, and vanished. A tree grew in his place, bearing fruit shaped like hourglasses. Time, the city whispered, had begun to eat itself. The spiral feasted on impermanence. Language collapsed further. People spoke only in sighs, in the tilt of the head, the clench of fingers. One man communicated through blinking, a woman through tapping her heel. Entire dialogues occurred without sound, yet understanding deepened. Misunderstandings disappeared. The spiral made silence articulate. Light ceased obeying physics. Shadows cast upward. Torches illuminated the past instead of the present. One candle, when lit, showed your childhood on the wall beside you. Another revealed your future. People used them sparingly. Too much knowing dissolved ID, entity. The spiral moderated revelation. Finally, one night, the entire city exhaled. Not the people of the city. Stones shifted, air warmed. A hum emerged from the ground. Soft, sustained, low. It lasted 7 minutes. Then, all returned to stillness. But something had ended, or begun. People walked differently, spoke differently. Some disappeared altogether, not tragically, but with a sense of fulfillment. One man left a note. "I've become the memory that kept me awake." The spiral closed its current chapter, and through it all, Beneath layers of silence, wonder, and dissolution, the king remained, not as monarch, not as myth, but as pattern. His choices became weather. His regrets became trees. His silence, the shape of night. In the deepest chamber of the earth, his crown still sat not on a head, not on a throne, but suspended in nothing. And it pulsed, faintly, patiently, forever. The final movement of memory began not with thunder, but with stillness so pure it seemed fabricated. Entire landscapes paused, held within a breath that was neither inhaled nor exhaled. The sea flattened, the trees refused to sway, even the insects withdrew their hum, as if summoned by an older silence. The spiral no longer expanded, it folded, curled, turned upon itself like a sleeping creature circling into warmth. The last dream of the king began, but it was not his dream, it was the world's. A quiet that felt like morning settled over the hills where once stood cities. Pillars broken, statues eyeless, inscriptions rubbed smooth by centuries. Yet something beneath stirred stone that remembered being mountain, wind that remembered being whisper, soil that remembered footsteps now erased. Beneath the ruins, an underground hall long forgotten revealed itself through the collapse of a single brick. Within, rows of mirrors faced each other in an infinite regression of reflections. But none showed the viewer, only the throne, over and over again, always empty, always waiting. In a village at the edge of memory, an old woman wove tapestries from threads of shadow. She did not speak. Her fingers bled stories. Each thread shimmered, and when held against firelight, revealed a moment in the king's life, not the battles, not the decrees, but the silences. A shared glance, a moment of hesitation, a night when he stood by a window and asked no one for forgiveness. She wove until her fingers vanished. Her final tapestry showed a spiral devouring a sun. The people hung it at the center of the village and never looked at it again. Elsewhere, a boy born without eyes led a group through a forest they thought they knew. He hummed as he walked. At a clearing none remembered, he stopped. "Here," he said. "This is where he buried the name." No one dug. They simply sat, back straight, listening to the wind attempt speech. They stayed for 3 days. When they returned, they no longer used names. They communicated through gesture, breath, and shared stillness. Language, they said, was too young. A black river emerged, where once flowed a road. No one crossed it. It moved uphill, whispered in reverse, and left frost wherever it touched. Animals refused to drink from it. Birds circled above, crying sounds that matched no known creature. Fishermen dropped nets into its depths and retrieved stones with symbols no chisel had carved. One stone bore an open eye, another, a closed mouth, a third, a spiral eating itself. They placed them in a circle and sat in its center. Those who entered the circle never left the same. They remembered wrong. One man claimed he was now his own grandfather. Another forgot how to speak but composed music with his heartbeat. A child aged 10 years overnight, then began counting backward. In a high mountain cave, a fire burned cold. Around it sat 12 figures cloaked in silence. They were neither monks nor kings, neither old nor young. They carried no scrolls, no staffs, only absence. When they moved, their feet made no sound. When they opened their mouths, snow fell. Each held a fragment of the king's final breath. They said nothing. Their presence was enough to bend wind. Travelers approached the mountain and turned back not from fear, but reverence. Beneath the roots of the oldest olive tree, a chamber was discovered. Inside, a table, 2 cups, one filled with ink, the other with salt. A chair faced the wall, where a phrase was etched: "To drink either is to forget the other." No one touched the cups, but dreams of ink and salt began to haunt those who merely heard of them. Some awoke with brine in their mouths. Others began to write involuntarily, covering walls with texts and spirals. One such wall collapsed inward and revealed nothing, just void. Those who stared into it claimed to see themselves looking back, but older, slower, heavier, with unspoken stories. The spiral had become recursive. Pilgrims walked paths that led them in loops, not physically, but spiritually. They arrived at places they'd never left, carried conversations they hadn't started. One spoke of a woman he loved before he was born. Another wept for a war that hadn't yet begun. Their tears watered ground that refused to yield grass, but from it grew silence and shapes. Shapes that resembled letters of a forgotten alphabet. An ancient goat, long thought extinct, was found frozen in a perfect cube of ice on a mountaintop. Its eyes were open, in each, the reflection of a city that no longer existed. Scholars claimed it was Atlantis. Children claimed it was Sparta. A shepherd claimed it was home. No one touched the ice. It melted on its own under moonlight, and the water flowed uphill into the mouth of a cave shaped like a king's crown. Inside, a voice whispered, "The end is a corridor." In the dream libraries of old Athens, books rewrote themselves. Every page now bore spirals that shifted when not observed. Readers found their names changed within the texts. "You are not the reader," one book claimed. "You are the footnote." Another said, "His silence is your inheritance." A third, "If you close this book, he dreams of you." The librarians burned the books, but the ashes formed new volumes. They stopped resisting. They read aloud in shifts. One librarian's voice became wind, another's thunder. A third vanished mid-sentence and was found in a child's lullaby sung miles away. People stopped sleeping in beds. They slept standing, kneeling, floating. Sleep became an act of submission. To rest was to remember, and to remember was to summon. The king no longer needed monuments. His name was etched in the pause between thoughts. His story not told, but felt in the ache of joints before rain, in the breath caught before a word is spoken, in the moment a hand reaches and finds nothing. Finally, the spiral completed itself. It did not end. It curled into a still point, a final room, within which sat a final chair. Upon it, a crown not gold, not iron, but woven from absence. Around it, no guards, no servants, no candles, just one echo, endlessly folding. He was, and then again, he is, and then again, you are. That was all. No end, only recursion. Only memory humming itself into stillness. Sleep now. The king watches the dark not to guard it, but to remember how it was made.